I'd like to call to order this meeting of the Sacramento County Board of Supervisors back to order for the Tuesday of January 28th. Madam Clerk, will you please call the roll and establish a quorum?
Supervisors Frost. Here. Kennedy.
Here.
Natoli.
Here.
Peters.
Here.
Cerna. You have a quorum.
Great, thank you. So again, just want to remind folks that if you wish to address the Board of Supervisors on any item that's on the balance of our calendar this afternoon, you're certainly welcome to do so. We ask that you complete a speaker slip, and we have speaker slips located in the back of chambers. We have staff to help you complete those slips. If you could please print clearly your name so that I can avoid mispronouncing it when I call you up. You do have 3 minutes to address the board. We ask that you please respect that 3-minute limit, and that's in place so that everyone has an opportunity to address the board if they so choose. And with that, we'll take our first afternoon item.
Okay, item 53 is a request for a general plan amendments, specific plan amendment, adoption of Mather South Community Master Plan, zoning ordinance amendment, adoptions of an affordable housing strategy, amendment of a public facilities financing plan, adoption of the Mather South Urban Services Plan, and adoption of development agreement for a property located at the northwestern corner of Sunrise Boulevard and Kiefer Boulevard. The environmental document is a final environmental impact report.
Okay, before we hear from planning staff, I believe our county council has a statement to make.
Thank you, Chair Cerna. Lisa Travis, County Council. Before we get started, I just wanted to alert the board that in December of 2019, our office requested formal advice from the Fair Political Practices Commission as to whether or not Supervisor Susan Peters has an impermissible conflict on the matter before you today. And I'm just reporting that we received formal advice yesterday afternoon that based upon the prospective decision that the board, or items that the board will be considering today, Supervisor Peters does not have a conflict and may participate in the deliberations and vote today.
Great. Thank you for that. All right. Leanne, you have the floor.
All right, thank you very much. Leanne Moffett, your County Planning Director. I'm here just to give some introductory remarks before I hand the presentation over to Todd Smith, who will be going through the PowerPoint. I just wanted to provide a little historical perspective about some of the events that have led to this hearing today. I know that I have been lucky to work for many years on the conversion of Mather from an Air Force base into what it is becoming today. I had the privilege to be assigned to the Mather Internal Study Team in the 90s when I was a young planner still, and was the project manager for the Mather specific plan, which is this document right here, which was adopted in May of 1997, and I was the primary author of the accompanying zoning ordinance, which was adopted by the board on June 11th, 1997. And I will note I was not in the chambers on that day for the adoption of the zoning ordinance because I was having child number 2, and I was at the hospital in labor and giving birth to a child who is now over 22 years old. So it's been a really long process leading up to the consideration of some actual development in portions of Mather. And there was a lot of work done by county staff down in this portion of the larger Mather area. And in 2005, 2006, there was a stakeholder process around the development of the preserve and this sort of economic development conveyance piece. And ultimately, that led to the submittal of an application to Planning and Environmental Review by the Lewis Group for the Mather South project in 2013. Planning staff worked on that project, analyzed it, did a CEQA document, and I also stood before you on September 16th, 2015 to kick off the lengthy staff presentation on that version of the project. And as several of the board members will recall, we had a substantial amount of testimony that day. And so the board ultimately felt that there was a need to address the numerous comments that were coming from the community, which were predominantly around the need to really look in more depth at the preserve and some of the vernal pool features and resources on the site. So we embarked on a stakeholder process that was led by planning And we had participation by a variety of county representatives. Supervisor Natoli, you attended many of those meetings. And we had the applicant representatives, 2 groups associated with residents at Mather, including Mather Alliance, and 3 environmental organizations, the Environmental Council of Sacramento, the Sierra Club, and Splash. We came back to the board as that effort was proving successful, and we stood before you on February 24th, 2016 and July 26th, 2016. And we had gotten to the point where the alternative had developed enough that the board felt comfortable with us going back and revising the lengthy documents that it takes in order to bring a project forward. That resulted in the 6 binders of materials that we have over on the chairs over here that many of you have electronically and some of you have in hard copy with all of that. So. With those opening remarks, again, Todd Smith will be giving the staff presentation about what the current version of the project is, what's happened more recently. We have a variety of staff over here to your right, my left, who are here to support us. I'm not going to name everyone, but we do have Department of Transportation staff, including Ron Vicari, the director, economic development staff, including Troy Givens, county engineering, including Bob Davison, water resources, Michael Peterson. We have representatives of Metro Fire, Jeff Fry, and Chief Brian Shannon, and we also have the applicant, Phil Rodriguez, and his entire team. So if there are no further questions from the board, I will turn it over to Todd Smith.
Supervisor Tolley?
Yeah, just a question, Leanne, before you leave the
Yes.
podium. Thanks for your introductory comments, and I wanted to understand that in the presentation, there's been a flurry of activity, certainly surrounding some of the considerations in the environmental impact reports and different elements of that. And there's been communication, again, it's publicly available, but shared as recently as just within the last few hours. So is Todd going to, or who's going to cover all that? Because again, trying to keep up with it, I mean, it was one thing to pile through the material that was generated in advance of this hearing, but obviously what's occurred over the last week and a half or 2 weeks has generated a whole lot more of back and forth, some of it pretty targeted and precise in its point of inquiry as well as point of response. So who's going to cover that, or how's that intended to be covered today?
Got it. Well, how about if I lead off by kind of previewing what some of those correspondence have been, and then Todd in his presentation is going to get into some of the actual content and the meat of some of that.
Okay. And I don't want to get ahead of you. I just didn't know because some of it's very, very current. I mean, within the last few hours. So
sure. Yeah. Well, let me at least go through the list of what we have received relatively recently, and then we'll sort of have that list in front of us, and then Todd will be able to cover any content, and we also have representatives from the applicant's team who may also be able to help us work through those issues as they come up. So starting with the older item on my list, we have a January 23rd, 2020 letter from JMBM, which is a comment letter on the EIR referencing several prior comment letters from 2019. We have a January 24th, 2020 correspondence from Monchamp Meldrum, who are the applicant's attorneys, representatives that were responding to that prior letter from the December 20th letter. We have a staff email that's dated January 24th, which is in response to a number of inquiries that we were getting from the board that we wanted to put out there. We have a correspondence from January 24th from JMBM requesting to recirculate. We have a January 27th letter from SAC 350 Ecos and Sierra Club. We have a staff response on January 27th, responding to the January 24th letter from JMBM. So staff has been responding as this stuff has come along. We have a January 28th staff memo regarding several revised mitigation measures and a revised attachment for the record here today, and Todd will be reviewing that. And then most recently, we have Monchamp Meldrum on today, the 28th, with an additional response to some of the content. Okay. So there has been, every time there's been a comment that's come in, staff and or the applicant's attorneys have sought to respond with technical information, much of which is pointing back to the prior record and the prior materials in the CEQA documents.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, board members.
Good afternoon, Todd.
Todd Smith, Principal Planner in the Office of Planning and Environmental Review. I am going to give you a very short presentation on the Mather South project, starting with an overview. The project is roughly 848 acres within the Mather Field Specific Plan, which, as Leanne mentioned, was adopted in 1997. It is in the Cordova community area, and it's also inside the county's urban policy area. Leanne also mentioned the stakeholder efforts in 2013 and 2016, of which I was a part. We went through a number of meetings with several representatives of the neighborhood at Independence at Mather, as well as ECOS, the Sierra Club, and Sacramento Splash, that resulted in a number of improvements to the project that is here before you today. The first improvement was increase of the Mather Preserve, or now the Isla Collin Preserve. The acreage increased to over 1,300 acres from 1,272. There was a commitment made as part of that process to avoid what's known as the critter pool and the spadefoot pool, and I'll show you where those are on the land use plan in just a minute. We also committed to a realignment of Zinfandel Drive. Originally, this was planned to be closer to the western edge of Mather South, and you'll see in the next couple of slides how it curves to avoid the spadefoot pool. And finally, the conceptual plan for Mather South originally included roughly 150 acres for a regional sports park and then about 130 acres for a university. Both of those land use designations were removed from the plan, and the revised plan now incorporates an environmental education campus. The requested entitlements before you today are generally three categories, starting at the top level, a general plan, multiple general plan amendments to the land use diagram. That is changing the designation from UDA, or urban development area, to the land uses proposed as part of the project. The second component is to the transportation plan, which is reflecting the proposed roadway alignments on the site, as well as the designations of adjacent roadways, Kiefer Boulevard to the south, Douglas Boulevard, or Douglas Road to the north, and the transit systems that's proposed as part of the project. I do also want to note on the transportation plan, we have a designation for a future multimodal crossing of the Folsom South Canal that's incorporated into the general plan transportation plan. And then finally, the bicycle master plan. This is an amendment to incorporate the proposed regional and class 1 facilities that are part of the project. Stepping down to the next level, the specific plan amendment, and the zoning ordinance amendment would incorporate the Mather South Community Master Plan as part of those governing documents for development of the area. And the project also includes an affordable housing strategy, an amendment to the Mather Field Public Facilities Financing Plan, an urban services plan that demonstrates how services will be provided to the project, and finally, a development agreement. So the detail of the project, here on the slide, I'm not going to run through all these numbers, but I do want to highlight where those commitments were made regarding the critter pool and the spadefoot pool. So, well, the pointer isn't working very well. You see that kind of olive tan colored designation with the EC on it. That's the Environmental Education Campus, kind of centrally located on the northern portion of the project. Immediately to the east is the light green. That is the critter pool location. So it's not just the pool itself, it's the associated watershed upstream. Moving to the south, to the west of Zinfandel Drive, which is that big curve on the west side of the project, you'll see about 53 acres that's open space Mather Preserve. That was what was added to the Mather Preserve to avoid the spadefoot pool. And then other highlights, the Research and Development Park, 21 acres at the southeast corner of the project. Obviously, we've got the requisite parks and schools associated with the project. Those locations have been identified through coordination and guidance from Elk Grove Unified School District and Cordova Rec and Park District.
Hey, Todd, I think we have a question from Supervisor
Yeah,
Toller.
I'm just questioning why you have the exhibit up there. So the 28-acre environmental education campus, does the carve out for the affordable housing, the 10 acres, come off of the 28? So essentially it's only 18 acres for the campus itself, or is it that the units, because you contemplate 200 affordable housing units, I assume multifamily, and there's a dedication in the documentation for 10
Right.
acres. So how come the calculation is still 28 when it's actually 18 for the environmental center? Is it because you take the campus concept, Todd, or what?
It's part of the campus concept. You are correct, Supervisor Natoli. The affordable housing strategy does include designation of approximately 10 acres for dedication for affordable housing units, about 200 units. It is envisioned by the applicant team that that housing could be for either faculty or staff or students as part of that environmental education campus, but it's obviously not limited to those folks.
Okay. So, but 10 acres has to be carved out.
That's
or,
correct.
Or at least as
It's a
it's
part of the
calculated, because there's a
28.
fee that they have to pay in addition to.
Right.
Okay.
I'll cover that in a
Okay, all right. I just was
slide.
curious. You had the map up there, so, okay, thanks.
Yep. And then finally, on the graphic of the land use plan, these dark green curvilinear pathways throughout the project, those are existing either creek corridors or drainage corridors that were, as part of the stakeholder process, the applicant committed to setting those aside. And there are some trails as part of the project that will go on the edges of those features. So moving on to the general plan consistency analysis, the project does meet most of the criteria of our land use element policy LU 120. And I want to make this point because the project, I said earlier, is inside the urban policy area. LU 120 was adopted by the board as part of our general plan update in 2011 for projects that are outside the urban policy area. However, staff has applied this policy in order to be consistent with the other projects that are going through the process in the Jackson Highway corridor. The project also includes a financing plan and urban services plan that demonstrates what the infrastructure costs are for the project as well as the necessary services, whether it's parks, maintenance of those facilities, Metro Fire is one example, and all the necessary funding mechanisms are included in both of those documents. As part of our general plan, we also require a fiscal impact analysis to demonstrate whether the project would have any negative impact on the county's general fund or existing ratepayers. That is included in your package today, and it demonstrates that there is no negative impact on the general fund or existing ratepayers. The affordable housing strategy, excuse me, that we were speaking about a moment ago, that has been reviewed with SHRA staff. It is consistent with the affordable housing ordinance, and it does include dedication of 10 acres consisting of about 200 units that is a part of the environmental education campus. For the balance of the project's obligation for affordable housing, there would be a fee payment, affordable housing fee payment on the residential units, roughly $3.7 million. That comes in on a building permit by building permit basis. And then finally, we have appropriate habitat avoidance that we talked about earlier with avoidance of those resources within the project.
Todd, I have a question about the affordable housing strategy. So you mentioned the $3+ million fee payment in the 10-acre site. How are we to think about the $21.7 million total affordability fee relative to the 10 acres? In other words, is there some kind of value juxtaposition of the total fee collected versus the value of the land? You take the balance, that's your fee that you get to then apply to the land basis to basically subsidize the production of affordable housing?
Generally, yes. There's a detailed calculation that's in the affordable housing strategy that takes what the current affordable housing fee is, then anticipates what that might be on an approximate square footage value of homes to result in either an acreage, a number of units, or a fee. And we try to balance that on projects of this scale such that we get a 50-50 or roughly that balance between land dedication and fee payment so that it's clear from the beginning of a project like this where the affordable housing is intended to go so that there's not a surprise down the road for future residents, and so that there's some cash flow coming in on the fee payment side to actually subsidize the production.
So that answers the how and the where, but what about the when? So
Sure.
there's a detailed phasing plan here.
Right.
Maybe you can speak a little bit about what the expectation is for the actual production availability of those affordable units relative to the rest of the project.
Sure. The affordable housing strategy details a timeline, and in the ordinance it speaks to, and in the strategy itself it speaks to no more than 75% of the project can be built until those units come online.
And that is memorialized in a development agreement?
The development agreement speaks to or references the affordable housing strategy,
Okay.
which has been reviewed and approved by SHRA staff. It is one of the items that would be recommended for approval today.
And remind me, is the 75% threshold of completion, is that a standard policy that we've adopted that would apply to any project?
Yes,
Or
it
is that
is.
something that's been negotiated individually?
That is a standard timing.
Okay. All right. Supervisor Patoli?
And just a follow-on, Todd, I don't know if it's on a subsequent slide or not, but in addition to the affordable housing component of both the on-site dedication of land and concurrence with the ordinances, as Supervisor Cerna was questioning, there is, for the first time, this is under the general plan, a infill fee that will be assessed per unit. Are you going to cover that later on? Because I had a couple
I am
questions.
going to cover it later on, yes.
Okay, good. I'll have some questions for you. Okay, good. Thanks.
All right, later on. Development agreement. So I'm going to briefly summarize some of this. The development agreement is something that the county staff have worked out with the applicant. The applicant has voluntarily committed to the contents of the development agreement, and I want to highlight a couple of things. The initial community benefits, these are local improvements of existing facilities within the Mather area. It also includes construction of a new building shell that would be on the environmental education campus. It includes park ranger funding for the term of the development agreement, which is 20 years with potential for 2 5-year extensions. It requires participation in the transportation mitigation strategy, which was, you may recall, approved by the board in July of last year. It includes trip reduction services. These are similar to what's typically included in a Transportation Management Association, or a TMA, that speak to things like rideshare, transit, guaranteed ride home, things of that nature, which the intent of is to reduce vehicle miles traveled and therefore greenhouse gas emissions. It includes electric vehicle charging facilities, and not just the residential, but the non-residential components of the project, and a commitment to green building measures as part of the California Green Building Standards. And finally, the infill fee. This is, I think, Supervisor Natoli, what you were going to ask about. This is a $1,000 per dwelling unit equivalent, and that would be paid at a building permit time. That money would go into a separate account that would be dedicated to facilitating infill development within the urban unincorporated county.
If I could, Mr. Chair, just again, this is I think our initial foray into this area. Obviously, we talked about it much in the development of general plan, as some of my colleagues will recall, in new growth areas. But I guess the piece that still needs to be addressed by this board is that, in the development agreement, it calls out that it'll be help facilitate, as you said, Todd, infill development in the urban unincorporated portion of the county and locations targeted for infill development. That's pretty general, and I guess what I would hope that as a part of direction coming out of any board action, that we would return to these chambers at I guess maybe even a date certain, but certainly within a reasonable time frame, to have a discussion about what that entails. That funding won't be available obviously until homes are constructed in any of the plan area in the Jackson corridor, this because I assume this would apply to other projects that are yet to come before us. But my point being is that to support infill development, that can be a lot of different things. It can be reinvesting in housing stock, it could be investing in new housing stock, it could be reinvesting in older commercial corridors, it could be infrastructure improvements, and if I'm off base on any of those suggestions. But I do think it's important that we have some policy discussion around that as a board to set the framework so that people have an idea and certainly can weigh in on ideas and thoughts about how that money might be utilized once it would become available, and in what sort of sequence. I would just also note, and I don't know that anybody's here today from the Rosemont community, but as you're well aware, Todd, you attended a couple of sessions with me and other members of the planning department in talking with residents and business owners and association members there. And there was concern that's been expressed, I think, over the course of many years in hearings that, certain neighborhoods, not just Rosemont, there are other unincorporated area communities that are adjacent, certainly both north and south of the American River, that concern that some of those areas are already feeling, the kind of the stresses and strains of, folks looking to newer neighborhoods, investment in newer commercial centers. And so I know that you certainly tuned in on those discussions, and I appreciate the staff work around this. And it was obviously a board direction and a general plan to, look at how we would compensate for some of the impacts, but also encourage folks to invest and reinvest in the areas that are, quote, infill. So I guess in essence, without posing a question specifically to you, I would say maybe through you, and certainly I know I've spoken to Nav about this as well, and Leanne, I think we need to have at some juncture, not too distant future, a workshop around that, and begin talking about ways and where and timing, obviously, which is dependent upon receipt of those funds, assuming those conditions put in place. But I don't know any other thoughts, because again, you've spent a lot of evenings and other times out, obviously with stakeholder groups and others, and I don't know if staff even has any conceptual ideas about how it might be used. But again, we don't have to debate any of that today. But just any comments you might have, because again, you've worked pretty closely with the community on this and developers.
I would respond by saying I think you're correct, and the language is broad, but the examples that you spoke about are what's envisioned by staff. The other side of what long-range planning does is tries to facilitate infill development, which is often challenging because of a number of constraints, whether they're infrastructure related or some other incentives that come to mind that we've been talking about internally. That's what's envisioned for this separate account.
Okay.
Generally.
That's all I have. Thank you.
Todd, before you leave the slide, you mentioned funding for park rangers is memorialized in the DA.
Right.
For no more, it sounds like no more than a maximum of 30 years. 20 years plus 2 5-year extensions.
That's correct.
What is the assumption that after that 30-year period, there's enough revenue coming from the project site itself to feed the general fund to cover a proportional share of the increase in need for park ranger service?
I don't think we went that far with the thought process. We just knew that there was an immediate need for, as we went through the stakeholder process, a desire to increase the patrols along the Mather Preserve area, the Collin Preserve. This was an attempt to augment the necessary funds to achieve that.
Okay, I guess I'm left wondering, and if there's others that can help explain it, I guess I'm left wondering what happens the first day of the 31st year. Do the park rangers go away? Do we not?
Right.
Are we faced then with a decision about how to continue funding? What
It's the
happens?
latter of what you said. At that point in the budget process, we'll be looking at continuing funding for it. It'll compete with other general fund
But
requirements.
that would be a consideration of general fund funding, not project specific funding.
Correct.
Is that something that we have typically done with large master plan communities that we've entitled in the past?
Not specifically to a park ranger, no, but we have, some applicants have dedicated a certain amount of funds for various organizations, whether they're nonprofit or otherwise.
Okay. I just find it a little odd just to kind of leave it with that assumption that that's going to happen in the future, and I'll continue to think about that. I might have some questions for the applicant representative when they come up to the podium. I don't know that I really feel terribly comfortable, quite frankly, approving a DA that assumes that there's going to be a net county cost in the 31st year when the three decades prior there was a direct nexus or connection in terms of the needs of that growing community and this particular service delivery.
Mr. Chair, if I could just follow on a related topic that, and again, it's assumed certainly in the specific plan and in the Mather documents, it relates to the preserve and certainly with the regulators on the permits that will be issued as relates to the preserve. And this goes to the endowment and obviously how that's going to be created. And I know I've spoken certainly from this side of the dais in the past that an obligation could be significant. And I think that, direction that at least has been presumed to staff is that somehow that endowment's all going to come, largely at the expense of either land sale proceeds or new homeowners, new business owners in, the yet to be developed portions of Mather. And, that could be a fairly heavy burden. And I guess I would just say that to your point about general fund, which obviously is called upon for many things and always, is much less than all the demands that are placed on it, but that the Mather Preserve is not just for the Mather homeowners or Mather businesses or for elements of the Mather complex. It is a treasure for this community and for probably the nation. I mean, when you look at that, this series of vernal pools and the habitat that will be preserved there, and for a endowment, I'll just use a number out of the air for $10 or $12 million endowment. It could be less, I guess, or maybe more. That's a heavy burden to put on. New homeowners. Again, I know that some of that will be shared by the property sales and by the development of the site that we're talking about here today. But I do think that we've kind of pushed that question and discussion off. And again, it's not so much for Todd, but I think that in the context of weighing that and considering approvals and certainly what we would put on the developer on this particular site, and any future development out there at Mather, to assume all that recovery coming out of land that will be, dedicated to either new uses or improved existing uses out there, because the airport has a little participation in that, but not very much, considering the size that it occupies on the Mather complex and, and the dollars generated there that, come to the airport enterprise. So I guess, Mr. Chair, I'm suggesting that, and not to bog down today's discussions, but that's an important point because I think, the assumptions that staff has made, and correct me if I'm wrong, Todd or Nav or Leanne or whoever, has been that, the yet undeveloped, unentitled lands and some of those that may have been entitled or are developable now are going to pay the freight for the endowment. Is that correct?
My understanding is that is correct. There's been a ratio, I think that maybe economic development can speak to, but there was a ratio defined some time ago. It included airports, as you mentioned. I think some component, a very small component to regional parks, some component to economic development, and some to this project.
Right, and so I think, and we haven't visited this certainly with the current board makeup since, this item's been, before us, even going back to 2015 and before. And I think it needs to be examined because, again, it's in the context not only of the here and now, but as you said, Mr. Chair, regarding support for ranger services, which are badly needed. And I know our folks have done an exemplary job in recent years to try to, I think, protect and defend against some of the intrusion on the preserve and damage that occurs and, work with homeowners and business owners and others out there. But the whole issue of the endowment has just been kind of assumed in previous planning documents and maybe even in previous board direction. But now we are with a project before us that, will be impacted, will be a consideration for, a derivative of some of the funding. But we don't know exactly what the number is. And secondly, I'm not certain, as we sit here today, that that I don't think it should just be funded off the lands at Mather. this preserve is bigger than Mather. And just like the American River Parkway or other major park facilities, they're treasures for this entire community, and we don't make people along the river pay for, any more than anybody else in their property tax or otherwise for the American River Parkway. So, again, there are implications to that discussion, that decision, but I think it's relevant, and we really haven't, again, had that discussion amongst the five of us with the broader community and certainly with our staff, laying out what the parameters might be. The assumption's always been that Mather is going to pay for all of the future endowment of that preserve, including the restoration of lands that have deteriorated over time, and then have endowments for other improvements that would occur over the life of that preserve, which is, I guess, forever. So I just think that's something we need to have a conversation about. And I don't know when would the appropriate time would be for that. But this, there's an assumption being placed on this Mather South for a fair share of that. And I guess my question is that I'm not so sure I want to start saying that, they got to pay whatever the percentage. How much percentage is assigned to Mather South for that?
Roughly 54%.
So we're saying 50% of any future endowment, which could be many millions of dollars. So half of that's going to go to 32, what's proposed, 32 homeowners, and some small commercial development is going to pay that in addition to everything else that's being contemplated here. And again, I don't know why 3,200 homeowners are going to have to pay, 50%, more than 50% of the freight. That just doesn't seem.
Can I
sure.
try and answer it,
Yeah.
at least from my perspective? I think I certainly appreciate. I know Supervisor Frost, by the way, wants to speak, so
That's
I
right.
won't.
This is on a different subject. So
Okay.
Go ahead.
So, but your point is well taken, Supervisor Tully, that this conversation needs to be had, and we need to vet fully how an endowment would work to protect the preserve, provide public safety at the preserve through our ranger service. The one thing I guess I would argue a little bit differently is I think the question has to be asked and answered, well, what is it about this particular development proposal that increases possible impact to the preserve area, therefore needing actually a proportionate more level of service, in this case park ranger service? And I think that's kind of the crux of the matter in terms of what is the fair percentage distribution between what future homeowners would pay out there to feed the endowment versus the general fund. And it just seems a little reverse engineered to have a discussion about how things are memorialized in a development agreement, which we're being asked to consider today, versus having a better understanding of that. Sue? Did you have a question on a different aspect of?
Yes.
Okay, go ahead.
Are you done?
Yeah.
My question was relating to the participation in the transportation mitigation strategy. I'm a little late to this party, so I'm sorry if I'm ignorant as to what covers what, but I wanted to make sure I understood. Does the transportation mitigation strategy cover all the projects that are potentially working together in that area, or are you talking regarding the general plan in general? Everybody goes by the same, everyone has their fair share of mitigation?
So let me back up. I'll answer generally, and DOT staff can chime in if necessary, but the transportation mitigation strategy that was approved by the board in July of last year was an outgrowth of what we call the joint traffic study. So 2013, staff encouraged all the project applicants, the 4 projects within the Jackson Highway Corridor, to come together to produce this joint traffic study so that we could have a consistent baseline and simplify, and I say that word hesitantly because it's very complicated, technical matter. The transportation mitigation strategy is based on the concept that the cumulative transportation analysis shows a certain amount of impacts, a certain amount of mitigation needs for the roadway infrastructure. Each project is responsible for paying its fair share to mitigate that cumulative impact. So those dollars are captured in each project's financing plan, and this is where I may defer to the technical experts on it if necessary, but there's a program there's a program through which DOT staff would run what's called a dynamic tool to help define subsequent impacts at later phases of the project. So historically, in the Vineyard area, there's been what's called triggers. It would be a specific number development threshold, and the developer of that trips that threshold would have to go and build a certain roadway. This is more dynamic than that. The intent is to be more responsive to where the development is occurring and where the impacts are occurring, so that the improvements can be more closely related to where those impacts are occurring. And the intent is to get ahead of those impacts and to have the funding necessary to go and improve those facilities. And I'm going to look at DOT to augment that if necessary.
So I guess the question that I have in relation to that, because it seems like we're still working on working out some of the issues with Rancho Murrieta. I don't know if the Douglas Road extension, as those other projects begin to kick in, and there's, who knows what road they have to move because of what, maybe vernal pools or something, infrastructure relating to water or something like that could have some cumulative impact on the projects that come later. Is your mitigation strategy treating everyone equitably? That seems to be a common theme with some of the inquiries that I'm getting. And so I wonder if you could speak to that.
I can. And again, DOT is here to speak on it if necessary, but our understanding from staff's perspective is that this is an equitable solution. Each project has its fair share based on the cumulative analysis of the cumulative impacts, and that's what they're responsible for.
And up front, cumulative or the unknown? It seems like there's a lot of unknown. So there could be a stacking of cost associated with those that come out last.
Ron Vicari, Director of Transportation. So the dynamic tool allows us to actually put where the development actually occurs. So it breaks it down into 4 different sections. And so we'll be able to respond to where, as development's occurring, where the impacts are the greatest. To answer your question, we will update the traffic model as development occurs everywhere, as well as these developments occur. We'll be able to tell exactly what area, what portion of their developments, and what development is moving forward and in what area, and we'll be able to see exactly where the impacts are occurring. I think some of your question was existing issues. This is a strategy that once development starts to occur, the money will start flowing and coming into the system, and we'll be able to start to identify, and certainly existing issues will play a role in that if we haven't addressed that before. I mean, it may be that we've addressed it prior to these developments occurring, but as the money starts coming in, it'll allow us to spend the money in the most efficient and effective way.
To this project or to the overall transportation strategy?
To the overall transportation strategy, which has both internal roads and external roads that are outside of these developments. So it'll show where the impacts are occurring, not only within and immediately adjacent to their development, but it'll show the impacts that are occurring in the surrounding area.
But once we approve this, it's all, Mather South is set in what they're paying into it. So if the costs do increase or there's other situations, like there's a lot of development going on out there in that direction that could actually impact congestion in this area. So I guess the question is, once this is approved, is that still a moving situation where each one of them pay into this transportation mitigation and it changes as the picture changes, or as each one comes out of the chute and they're ready to go, they operate under whatever their development agreement is?
Yeah, so to answer the question, sort of do we miss the opportunity after today? And the answer is that they pay transportation fees in two ways. They pay it through our development fee program, and they pay it through the financing plan that you're seeing. They get credit for what's in the financing plan to make sure we're not double charging them. But both plans are updated on basically a 5-year, approximate 5-year basis. So there's always opportunities if something changes drastically in the form of costs, or we identify some needs that weren't identified. There's always the ability for, as the plan continues, to update those plans.
Thank you.
Supervisor Tully?
Yeah, Ron, while you're there, a couple of questions for you. One relates to timing, and I appreciate that you've presented to this board and certainly used to this dynamic tool that allows us some flexibility to adjust. But one of the concerns, and we may hear from some folks today to the south of the project, residents and neighbors, is that the issue of a lot of cut-through traffic, and I'll get to that in a moment. But my first question is, what is the plan? We've got phased approaches here under the proposal by the developer, understanding that utilities we still have to extend utilities from Douglas down to south of the golf course so that sewer and water are available. But as everybody in this room, I'm sure, is aware that the paved section, stops, about a mile in, and then it's dirt road all the way to Kiefer. A lot of that road will now be incorporated within the confines of the preserve, since we did the bump out on the lower end of there. And again, thank you for transportation. We're working with the stakeholder group on that. What is the plan? Because again, I'm not looking so much for what the developer in this case might do, but if we're not going to put the road in where its current configuration, which is dirt. People are using that. It's not closed to through traffic. You use it at your own risk. But and so you got a development scenario that would phase 1 and phase 2 have roughly 1,800 houses in there. We have a pending project, New Bridge to the south, which will obviously pull utilities to the south. But there's a lot of ifs in there. In the meanwhile, then folks are utilizing, again at their own risk, they use that section of Zinfandel Eagle's Nest. Or they go to Sunrise and they cut through, and this goes to the cut-through question, and they're cutting through Kiefer to Eagle's Nest, and we know we had a serious accident out there last week. The roadway surface is very rural, and again, people are in a hurry to get where they want to get to and from. So I guess my first question, though, is so what is the plan for getting at least a 2-lane road south of where phase 1 and 2 would be in this development anytime soon? Because the right-of-way will be dedicated as a part of the maps and such, but beyond that, there's no adjacent development. And I know your traffic studies, you got binders of traffic studies here about which intersections are affected and so forth, but a few hundred houses is not going to generate a lot more localized traffic. You're going to have this more, regional community traffic. So what's the plan? Because that road is not going to be kept in its current location. So what's the use of paving that? And the bump out requires, all new grading, all new drainage. I didn't see it in the documents. I probably should have asked you this today just before the meeting, but what is the plan?
So, as we move along, speaking specifically about this mitigation strategy, it will allow us to show what making some of those improvements will do, and it will trigger that improvement at the timing when it's the highest priority improvement in the area. As for a lot of the things that we're bringing up in terms of the cut through and some of the issues that we're having, those are existing issues that we have and may need to be dealt with. Some of the things I know you're aware of that we're already working on solutions to. As well, there's overlapping facilities and other financing plans, and will certainly be in the future. Until this development starts occurring and money's generated through this, and we're allowed to have some funding that's going into the dynamic tool, it just falls into our normal system as prioritizing with other priorities within the unincorporated county.
Okay, well, I appreciate the answer. I guess I'm going to try to be a little more specific, though, about whether it's the dynamic tool or the reality tool that says, so you got a dirt road out there that's open to public use right now. And again, transportation's been helpful working with parks, trying to, get the potholes that would swallow a car, at least keep them halfway, in travelable shape. But we try not to encourage traffic, and we had it closed for a lot of years. I guess my point being, though, is you're going to introduce new development on the north end by the golf course with phase 1 and 2. I guess I didn't see anything for timing in here, dynamic tool otherwise. And what's going to happen to that road? Are you going to close it off, or are you going to leave it open? Because it will now basically intersect, or not, I don't say bisect, but it catches the preserve. That road will go through a portion of what's going to bump out on the preserve. And I don't, and if traffic increases, even in its current condition, I guess I don't know what that's contemplated in here. And Todd, I don't know if you've looked at that from transportation, but reality says to me that at some point in time, either through transportation initiative and not just relying on this development, that north-south circulation, unless the thought is you're just going to leave that dirt road until you build the other one and people can use it or not, I don't think it's a very elegant solution, because I think we're going to encounter some other issues, including the encroachment on the preserve. So has anybody got an idea what the plan is, timing-wise, money aside?
Well, we are certainly moving forward on identifying the alignments of that and other roads, as you're aware of, getting everything set so that we can move forward once the monies start generating. But again, I know with all the, just to give you an example, with all of the 4 Jackson projects, there's approximately $500 million worth of improvements that are going to come along and support those. But I do hear what you're saying in that that it's hard to predict the timing of that. It's hard to predict not only the timing of the overall strategy, but each individual project. We're trying to gear those up and identify what the solutions are, so we're ready to go as the money's generated. This dynamic tool will also point us in the right direction of what's needed at what time. But again, I do hear what you're saying. It is very hard to predict the actual timing of when they'll be implemented.
Okay, just again, I know Todd has got a presentation, but at some point in time before we conclude our hearing today, I guess I want to have a further discussion about the realigned section of Zinfandel beyond phase 1 and 2 of the proposed development, and recognizing it might be incumbent upon what Newbridge may do or not do, because the utilities have to come down, at least a portion of them that way. But that, in traffic studies, if I'm not mistaken, was seen to be, that was going to be sufficient, for taking traffic. But what we're doing is basically going to approve a one-way in, one-way out type of a situation, or either that or go through Independence of Mather, which we already know is an issue. And I know you're looking at Douglas Road Extension, and I appreciate that. That's going to be years off, even with the good work you're going to advance here in the next couple of years. But the north-south connection was pointed out even in some of our earlier hearings. I'm going back several years ago now. And I guess I just don't know what the plan is beyond using a dynamic tool. It says, well, when we get the money, we'll look at the priorities, or we'll look at priorities and then have money fit to it. Doesn't answer the question about a dirt road going through the preserve that's open to the public that people can choose to use or not, and will be used, I got to imagine, more and more frequently, again, that's the question. So maybe you can think about it a little bit, and we can come back to it before we're done here today. So thanks. Anything you want to add, Todd, on that?
A couple basic points, but we're going to have a subsequent conversation around it. But what immediately comes to mind for me is that subsequent tentative maps, when we get into the finer level of detail, we obviously continue working with transportation staff and Metro Fire staff. One of the points that we have in our county code is related to 2 points of access for, excuse me, there's a threshold number of lots, I believe it's 40.
40.
And that would most likely trigger either that improvement or something else within the development itself. Obviously, I can't speak to when, but that's what immediately comes to mind. A subsequent map or a phase might be conditioned as part of that dynamic tool, or as part of that 2 points of access requirement to build that subsequent leg. The second part that I just spoke to Liz Bellis from Regional Parks. They're looking at it as part of the public access plan for the Mather Preserve as well. So we can get into the details of that if necessary, but that's my immediate response.
Okay. All right, thanks.
All right. Anything else on the development agreement? Okay. Moving forward to environmental review, this project has an EIR. It's in those binders along with all the related technical studies. The draft EIR was published in January 2019, 45-day public review period, fairly common. Closed on February 22nd. We've got a number of comment letters. The final EIR, which was published on January 17th, includes a mitigation monitoring reporting program, or MMRP. Excuse me, I apologize for my voice today. There were some changes to the mitigation measures in the final EIR that are reflected on the slide here. Mitigation measure AQ3, this came out of further conversations with the Metro Air Quality Management District, requires full electrification of all the residential units, so no new natural gas, and this would further reduce the nitrous oxides and greenhouse gas emissions. Excuse me. And then we also revised the transportation mitigation measures to be consistent with that mitigation strategy that was approved by the board back in July. I do want to highlight a couple of, thank you, subsequent changes that are in one of those communications that came earlier today. So we prepared a staff memo that's in response to 350 Sacramento letter from yesterday, as well as the Montchamp letter this morning that highlights some revisions to mitigation measures AQ3, CC2, and CC3, and we did publish or distribute to everyone a revised mitigation monitoring reporting program, big, thick document, and I want to clarify some of those changes. So the strikeouts that we identified in AQ3, we're striking out to the extent feasible, because that measure refers to mitigation measure CC2, and you'll find that on page MMRP 22 is where that change is. And then in mitigation measure CC2, we did identify feasible mitigation that requires Tier 1 and/or Tier 2 California Green Building standards for transportation and building energy sectors. Those are on pages MMRP 101 and through 103. And then further in CC2, the revision defines timing for creation of a local composting program that achieves 75% waste diversion target. And then finally, CC3, the greenhouse gas emissions offsets language. There was a word that we changed in that. That's on page MMRP 105. The change is going from should to shall.
Before we leave that slide, I just want to point out that the final EIR was published in 2020.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah,
Thank you.
correct
There's a
that.
typo on that slide. January 17th, 2020, not 2019. For those who don't know what the MMRP is, the Mitigation Monitoring Reporting Program is something that we use as staff internally to document compliance with the mitigation measures for the life of the project. Our staff actually goes through the implementation steps that are in that program, compares detailed project plans when they come in, subsequent tentative maps, subsequent improvement plans to verify that those mitigation measures are actually implemented over the life of the project.
Todd, it looks like you're nearing wrap up of the presentation
Yes.
with your next slide, which had the header recommendation. Before you go there, though, I'd like to get some comment from County Counsel's office as to the nature of some of the somewhat late correspondence we've received relative to some grievance expressed about wanting to have a comment registered, acknowledged, put on the record formally relative to the draft EIR, perhaps outside of the 45-day review period, and what has been our kind of standard response, not just to those that have chosen to submit in writing their concerns, but perhaps others.
So regulations, the CEQA guidelines, specifically give the discretion to the county or the lead agency as to whether to respond formally in writing to comments received after the close of the comment period. In this particular case, which is somewhat unusual, we have received numerous comments almost a year after the close of the comment period. Staff has attempted to address each of those, and Todd is prepared to speak to many of the issues raised. Our office has reviewed each of the inquiries and the comments, as has the Applicants Council, and the Applicants Council has prepared responses line by line to each of the comments raised, but there is no duty on behalf of the lead agency legally to prepare those types of responses because of the belatedness of the submissions.
Thank you for that. And then typically, and this has to do with my own experience being a former project manager and working very closely on the drafting of CEQA documents myself, there is some discretion too, whether during a very fluid process of developing an administrative draft EIR, a draft EIR, and finally a final EIR, as to whether or not you want to say up front, we're going to go over and above a 45-day standard review period. You could say up front, we're going to do a 2-month review period. In this case, it might be a controversial project. It might warrant some special circumstance or consideration in terms of having a longer review period. So I just want to make clear there's that discretion that is almost kind of also institutional for our staff to have, for the county to have, in terms of how we manage these projects. Okay. Thank you.
So moving on to the recommendations. The project was heard by both the Cordova and Vineyard CPACs in February 2019. Both CPACs recommended approval unanimously. The Planning Commission in October of 2019, unanimous recommendation for approval. There was testimony in support of the project there from the residents at Independence at Mather, the Mather Alliance, as well as Sacramento Splash. And obviously staff's recommendation today is approval of the project, which includes the following actions. It would be certification of the final EIR as adequate and complete, and approving the requested entitlements subject to the findings and conditions that are, with the changes that are identified in that memorandum that we sent this morning. We would recommend adoption of the revised mitigation monitoring and reporting program, adoption of the CEQA findings of fact and statement of overriding considerations with those changes, again, that we identified in the memo this morning. And I do want to highlight that there will be future actions that are subject to the MMRP and the conditions, such as formation of CFDs that are identified in the financing plan and urban services plan, and subsequent tentative maps. With that, that's the end of my presentation. And
I would jump in. We do have Bob Davison queued up to respond to Supervisor Cerna's question about the urban services plan and the park ranger component, if you'd like that now.
Why don't we go ahead and hear from Bob then?
Okay.
Good afternoon. I know there was an earlier question about trail services and specifically enforcement and whether that would end after 30 years. And I just want to point out that the Urban Services Plan provides that there will be a Jackson Corridor Trail CFD, Community Service Facilities District, which the Mather South project, as well as the other Jackson Corridor projects, will participate in. Trail service funding will not go to the general fund. It will go to a special fund that is dedicated to these services, and it will go on after 30 years. It's not related to bonds, so it doesn't have an ending date. And it will be dedicated for trail service, which includes maintenance of trails, but also specifically includes rangers. And with that, I can answer any questions if you have them.
That's very helpful and an important note to make in terms of what the expectation is decades out in terms of how that we're going to have a continued funding mechanism for an important service that I think we all believe needs to be well fortified to continue out here past the 30 years that's mentioned in the DA. So I appreciate that. Supervisor Frost?
Okay, I don't know if I need Todd for this question. I want to refer back to the EIR if I can. I have a question, first of all, relating to the process. It seems like, I guess, the comment period ended around March or April, and you were receiving input clear into November or December and working on it, and then we released all this and everyone had 10 or 11 days to review it. And it seems like I think I had 6 binders this thick that I was trying to get through, and I know how hard that was. And there was some question as to, you know, what were the final requirements of the Planning Commission that took place on Mather South, and what were the mitigation measures, and is there any one place where you can go to see a timeline and every one of those mitigation measures listed? So, because it kind of seems like there's a communication gap. Like maybe there are things that were mitigated and that are fair and everyone would be fine with, but they're not sure because they can't find it in all these documents. And so I wanted to bring that up. I don't know if there's a way that we can improve our communications or our process so that it's easier for everyone to be on the same page, or if you can help us with that. Maybe you can help me with that, because
Sure.
They're asking me and I don't know how to answer.
Sure. So I will respond 2 different points I heard there. One was, I do want to clarify the comment period on the draft EIR closed on February 22nd, 2019. It was not March or April. That's important from my perspective. The board package, and this is to your second point, where can one find all this information? So the board package includes 32 attachments. It includes the Planning Commission staff report as attachment 16. It includes the final EIR as attachments 18 through 22, and then all the appendices, which consist of primarily the technical studies that support the final EIR. And then attachment 32 is the findings of fact and statement of overriding considerations. These documents in their entirety, along with the memorandum that was, the memorandums that came in this morning, constitute the whole of the administrative record.
Okay.
So if an interested party wanted to know what happened at the Planning Commission in October and what changed between then and the board, they could look at those attachments and go through, find what changed, if
Okay.
anything.
So there were some things that I had a question about. One of them was actually the rendering plant. With the EIR, there was a comment that said that with the rendering plant, we were going to require that there would be a board review of the rendering plant decommissioning prior to approval of subdivision maps phases 3 and 4.
Yes.
That
so
doesn't seem like a condition. It seems like a review. It doesn't, you know, as I know Mather South is above the rendering plant, so it probably doesn't impact them as much, and I get that. But that is what is an overall, you know, kind of a shared consideration for everyone that's developing along that corridor. And so it seems like it should say that it will be decommissioned rather than, you know, the board will review to ensure that it's decommissioned. I know that that's coming up, but we can't assume anything in the world of development. So is there a way to have something more concrete, or can we say it will be decommissioned before those subdivision maps are approved?
So let me speak a little more broadly about this issue, because the rendering plant is the site of another application that we've been working on since 2011, called the Newbridge Specific Plan. Obviously, that project's not approved yet. We don't have a specific timeline from that applicant when they might decommission that plant. So we added a condition of approval, number 66, that requires a report back to the board prior to tentative subdivision maps in phases 3 and 4 of the Mather South project for a public discussion about the status of that decommissioning. It very well may be, if the New Bridge project is approved and the plant is decommissioned, there may be no issue. If it has not been decommissioned, then we have to consider, the board would have to consider whether it's appropriate at that point to consider approval of tentative maps in phases 3 and 4 close to the rendering plant. That the intent of that condition was to have that public discussion because we can't speak with certainty as to whether that will be decommissioned in the future. And it's difficult because, from staff's perspective, because that property is not owned by the applicant, and by putting a condition on the Mather South project requiring decommissioning of another operating facility that they do not own may be a challenge. But I'm open to further conversation about that, and I believe the operator of that facility is here today.
I guess I can understand the concern around the rendering plant. I know the owner and respect him, and I get that. I know that their application is moving forward very quickly. But I think for others in that area, and it's already a challenge. It's already a conversation that's happening. So that's one of the concerns, that's like a shared mitigation or a shared issue that everyone's going to have to deal with before all these come together. And so I guess I wish it was more. Do you assume that there could be development with the rendering plant further, that they could move forward with phase 3 and 4 with the rendering plant?
We have, in our analysis, assumed that it does not, the rendering plant stays there to be conservative because we can't guarantee a certain outcome on that adjacent project. The Mather Field specific plan and the SPA, the Special Planning Area Ordinance, does require disclosure to future buyers of that property down there in phases 3 and 4. It also, it also requires more than just disclosure. I think it's a notice, a deed notice, but I can dig out the exact language. But we did not assume that it goes away for the purposes of our analysis.
Okay, so it's not really a requirement. It's just a requirement that it be reviewed before subdivision maps 3 and 4.
Correct.
It's left open.
Correct.
And I had a question relating to the air quality. Is the air quality, are for everyone concerned moving forward, are the air quality requirements going to be consistent, or are they different based on whatever time that project comes to be approved, whatever the air quality requirements are at that time? Or is it like the traffic study? How does that work?
So because we have these 4 concurrent applications going through the process, staff has provided consistent guidance to each of the 4 applicants so that we have a consistent methodology, both on air quality and climate change, so that the analysis follows the same guidance that incorporates the Sacramento Metropolitan Air Quality Management District standards, as well as the county's guidance. So it's based on each project, it's based on current guidance from the county that's consistent with each project.
Okay, and then lastly for now, I just wanted to ask about the groundwater, because there was, I'm not sure when the groundwater study was done on this project, if it was before the groundwater act that had recently taken place and all the issues with the groundwater. Was it prior to, and will that have a different qualifying requirement for this project versus, because my understanding was that we have a groundwater study and there is plenty of water out there and there's no problem with the water, but yet with the what's the name of that act? The groundwater act, safety.
Sigma, sustainable groundwater.
Yeah.
Sigma.
Sustainable groundwater.
Yes.
We're working on, all of our analysis around Sigma. And so is that going to change the groundwater situation moving forward?
Sigma, the requirements of Sigma are identified and factored into the analysis for this project along the entire corridor.
And all of the other projects too?
Yeah,
and there's plenty of water out there for
There's
all
plenty of
them?
water. We have to ensure that the development as it's proceeding is in line with the Sigma goals for sustainability. And that's done through the Sacramento Central Groundwater Agency as a GSA. So that is part of the process. Sigma is not bifurcated from the requirements for these projects. The supply is there. These projects is not going to impact or compromise Sigma or meeting Sigma requirements.
Are there other requirements for each project as they come along with water that's separate from that?
Depending on their specific location, there may very well be, but in terms of being served by conjunctive use, that's a uniform policy. All of the development has to be both surface and groundwater tied into our conjunctive system so that we've got the best adaptability for supplying in wet years and dry years.
Okay, thank you.
Supervisor Natoli?
Yeah, Mike, before you sit down, Mike Peterson. I was just going to ask a question about drainage, Michael. I know I left you a message this morning. And I found the conditions in here relative to Beachstone Lakes and downstream in the Morrison corridor of the basin. But I want to be sure I'm clear. So the conditions that are being placed here will require 100% holding for volume, no increase in volume, and they'll have to meter it out. So the basins either on this site or adjacent areas that will be used for storage will there'll be no increase in volume. Is that correct?
The mitigation measures in the document identify payment of the volume mitigation fee or an approach to meter outflow so that you are not adding additional volume downstream. Both of those are listed as one or the other. As we proceed, we're going to be looking at, is there the opportunity to actually provide that, metering out of the additional volume. Currently the payment of the volume mitigation fee is the county's current approach.
Okay, well, I guess I was reading, I didn't expect you to have the document in front of you, but subsequent to my call this morning, where I see with the bullet point on page 35 of the mitigation measures says ensuring that no net project-related increase in volume in the Beachstone Lakes by metering outflow, as you just spoke to from the plan area, increasing storage capacity of on-site facilities, directing drainage into downstream facilities off-site, or other regional drainage solutions as determined by the County Department of Water Resources. It still leaves it up to you, but paying a fee doesn't necessarily accomplish that. So how is the assurance beyond what them paying a fee that says they've done their part? What's the timing and how does that get accounted for? I trust it's through your department, but I mean, where is the understanding that occurs and where's that regional solution?
As backbone infrastructure drainage studies are submitted for review, one of the things we have to look at is the potential impacts of climate change and how they're being addressed. This would be additionally one of those things that we would consider when those drainage studies are coming in subsequent phases of the project.
Okay, but to be clear though, that we are ensuring that there's no net volume project-related increase on this or the other projects as they come through. That's how the others want to be for us today. So that's what we're going to assure, however that's accomplished, in taking into account climate change. That's the obligation we take on by taking the fee. Is that right?
That's as is consistent with what the county has done
Right.
previously, correct?
Right. And I just know, again, as you're well aware, again, this has been a condition that's kind of evolved, but certainly over the course of almost 35 years now in different formats. And so, and I know you guys have been working really hard looking at different solutions, and I give you credit for that. I just was trying to make sure, because I say otherwise the fee is, it's very modest. It's a per acre fee, a few $100, and per acre, and then they've satisfied their obligation. They or anybody else, but in the meantime, we're still trying to figure out what that regional solution is, and hopefully we're going to have sufficient funds to do that.
Correct.
We are going to have sufficient funds?
No, I agree.
Oh.
Ideally, that's where we want to be. And we've had discussions with the board previously where there's the identification of cumulative volume into Beachstone Lake. How do we mitigate that? The regional project that was originally identified is no longer feasible. The board deemed that not feasible. So we're taking a project by project or a parcel by parcel approach for residents in the Beachstone Lakes area.
Oh no, I wasn't even looking downstream.
But we still are looking for how can we attack volume mitigation regionally.
Okay. So I wasn't even going downstream. I'm upstream in this segment of the drainage corridor, which is the upper reaches. Is that there's the contemplation here, a potential for 25,000 plus houses over the course of many decades, and all the development. But I'm not looking to the solution set that says raising houses down the beach. I'm talking about any volume offset in these projects. That's what we're ensuring. The fee doesn't do that. So what sort of regional solution are we looking at here? Are we looking at, holding basins? I mean, that's been talked about. I mean, there's been no secret, but I mean, what is it that we're going to do in the upper reaches long before it goes through the city of Sacramento, city of Elk Grove, and ends up down in Beachstone Lakes?
You'd have to consider things like expanding planned detention basins to hold additional volume.
Because this has 10 basins on this development alone.
Correct.
Some of that's for peak, some of it's for water quality, and some, I guess, is there any volume built into that?
There's volume inherently in that, but there's not a defined volume set aside for the impacts. But that is what is spoken to in the mitigation measure, is to revisit the backbone infrastructure drainage studies as they come in to identify means to attenuate that additional volume.
Because this is a different opportunity on the upper reaches of the watershed, different than what we might do once the water gets down there and becomes an issue for whatever contribution that makes to the volume. And so I guess when I see this, if somebody reads this, okay, county's taking care of it, but we haven't really figured out the solution set yet, and I appreciate the work that's gone behind this. And I raise it because I know that there's a lot of intervening projects in the Vineyard area, and certainly Elk Grove continues to develop, and it all feeds in that watershed that ends up in Point Pleasant and Beachstone Lakes area. So is there some expectation that we would have before maps are submitted here that we're going to have a better idea what that regional solution, at least maybe it's a sub-regional, maybe it's in this area where you've got major development plotted?
Yeah, I think that I'm referring to in the context of climate change. Hydraulic analysis is submitted in advance of I'm trying to find here potential improvements, so that we could identify that sort of a volume solution that could be implemented within the upper reaches of the watershed.
Because it's very very expensive on-site volume.
It is.
You take land out of developable potential unless you've got a big basin set aside or however you. And again, I guess I would just suggest and maybe Nav, as we've come back on the Morrison Creek Shed, Beachstone Lakes, and so forth, that we wrap this into the discussion, because this is this could offer at least some benefit and I think consideration for what ultimately ends up down in the Beachstone Lakes area. So. Okay.
Agreed.
All right, thanks. And I did have one other question, Mr. Chair. Just I wanted to raise this. I know we want to hear from folks, but when we come back and talk about the transportation-related question that I raised earlier, I also have a question regarding working with our fellow municipalities there, our traffic studies take into account impacts to Elk Grove, Folsom, Rancho Cordova, a city of Sacramento, and including rural intersections, which in rural streets, and again, appreciative of that look and those impacts. Do we have a counter arrangement with, for example, City of Rancho Cordova that continues to develop on the east side of Sunrise? We have City of Elk Grove that develops to the south. Their boundaries are pretty fixed. City of Sacramento, and you know what that means to Jackson Quarter, what that means to Sunrise, Bradshaw, and some of those areas. Do we have any concurrent arrangements, or is it all going to be on the development using the dynamic tool, all on the development that's contemplated in the unincorporated area?
Again, Ron Vicari, Director of Transportation. We do have reciprocal funding agreements, both with the City of Sacramento and Rancho Cordova. We're working with Elk Grove now to establish one, so we're reaching out to all of our bordering jurisdictions to enter into reciprocal funding agreements.
Okay, so, and maybe this, you can answer later, but specifically at the location where, you know, the Cavallo Ranch feeds in and some of those in the Anatolia into Kiefer Boulevard, at a signalized intersection, and you know, I don't know what the traffic movements are there right now at Kiefer at Sunrise, but I gotta imagine some come through Kiefer down to Eagles Nest down to Jackson Highway, and you know, that development certainly has preceded what we're contemplating here, and you know, it would seem to me if we have those arrangements that they're, you know, to work with our brethren in those municipalities, if there are impacts, you know, whether they be on county streets or on city streets or, you know, jointly shared like Jackson Highway, that we have a way to get to solutions that help the motorists, promote safety, and also, you know, balance impacts to local residents. And I don't know that those agreements embody that or not, Ron.
They do, and we do review all of the development applications in the jurisdictions. We review applications and comment whether or not we have a reciprocal funding agreement. But we also work with that jurisdictions to establish the funding in the cases that we do have reciprocal funding agreement in place. And as a matter of fact, we just had the first one where actually money's flowing from a development in Rancho Cordova to the city of Sacramento, I mean to the county of Sacramento, and we continue to work with the city of Sacramento on their developments.
All right, thanks. Okay, good.
Yeah.
That's all I need for right now. Thanks.
Okay. Other members of the board have questions for staff? If not, I'm in receipt of 9 speaker slips, and we are going to hear from members of the public who have signed up to speak on item 53. Again, before we get started, I'd remind speakers, please keep your comments to 3 minutes so that we can make sure that everyone who wants to address the board on this matter has the opportunity to do so. With that, first up is Barbara Leary. Following Ms. Leary is Oscar Balaguer. Sorry if I mispronounced that.
Good afternoon. Barbara Leary, I'm chair of the Sacramento Sierra Club Group. And I actually was hoping I would speak after Sean Worth, who's done a lot of work on behalf of the Motherlode Chapter Conservation Committee on this project with the proponents in preserving a lot of the habitat that has been set aside. My remarks to follow should not be construed as opposition to this project. I think that what I do want to get across is that the group is very concerned about the county's lack of progression towards adopting a climate action plan. And we feel that that framework is necessary in order to set clear guidelines and accountability for all projects within the county to ensure future livability and prosperity for all of our residents. Climate action sounds a little bit nebulous to people, but it involves steps that are doable at the onset of project planning. Some of the things have been accomplished with this plan, such as assuring transit infrastructure, although it looks like that could be augmented to include more space for public transit. A plan will help reduce heat islands by encouraging infill, increasing dense development, and increasing open space in the area. Establishing communities that are more walkable and independent of the need for single gas-fueled vehicle trips for daily tasks. Using construction materials that are least impactful on the environment and safer for inhabitants, and maintaining open spaces and habitat that reduce the impact of dense development. Again, I saw that some of these things have been included in this plan. There are a number of other plans that have not yet been approved. And we would like to encourage you all to encourage staff to proceed with a climate action plan for the county so that steps such as those can be incorporated in other projects. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Mr. Balaguer? Sorry.
Really close, Balaguer.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, supervisors. My name is Oscar Balaguer. I'm representing ECOS 350 Sacramento and Sierra Club. I'd like to note that we clearly want to recognize Lewis Holmes' responsive and responsible partnership working with the community to protect the on-site resources for this development. But we do have concerns on FEIR Chapter 7, which is climate change. We appreciate climate-related actions the county has taken so far, including a county operations climate action plan, maintaining the infill program, working with RT and SACOG, and initiating urban corridor and complete street projects. Now, we ask that you do more. Specifically, we ask that you adopt the greenhouse gas measures, which are specified in the general plan and in the FEIR for that general plan, including adopting a community-wide climate action plan. Mather's proposed greenhouse gas mitigation is not consistent with those earlier commitments. We're therefore seriously concerned that the plan is inconsistent with CEQA requirements. We have detailed these concerns in our current written comments and also in our October 31st comments on Jackson Township, DEIR. Board members, climate change on its current trajectory is certain to wreak havoc on our community. That's not a business as usual situation. We implore you to wholeheartedly do what's in your powers and what you have promised to help avert the worst of the climate threat. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you. Before I call the next name, I just want to make sure that our staff are taking note of the nature of the comments, because I would suspect you're going to be asked about them by board members after we hear from the last public speaker. So next up is Ken Plowski, followed by John Ellison.
Good afternoon, Chair and other members. My name is Ken Pulowski, and I'm the president of the Homeowners Association at Independence at Mather. And I do not represent the homeowners group as a whole. That's not something that we take a position on here. But what I do want to say is, first, I would like to commend the board for their previous action of sending this back to the drawing board and working. That was I feel a very wise and beneficial action that was shown after hearing from the community of the concerns and then setting up the stakeholders group. That is something that, as the president of the association, that I participated in with many other community members, I can tell you it was a very enlightening and very beneficial process that we went through, and together I feel that we all came up with something better than any of us individually could have conceived. And I would like to specifically commend the Lewis Group for their work. Even as we went in and we brought our ideas, they added on to those. They weren't pushing back on us. They were adding on and improving even the ideas that we came up with. And so this has been a tremendous collaborative experience, and I think it should be a model going forward. I know it's been attempted with some other, perhaps with less success, but it's been a great experience for us. And I can tell you that the community as a whole feels very comfortable with what is going forward. I know you guys brought up some issues relating to traffic, and I'm not sure that whole groundwater discussion, telling us there's plenty of groundwater when a couple of years ago, we weren't allowed to water our lawns and all our yards died, but I'm sure somebody's going to get that figured out. But I thank you for taking the time and the diligence to listen to the community and revisit this and come out with something that's better. And we look forward to having this and developing the preserve and having it out in perpetuity for the community and the county and the state and the country as a whole. So thank you.
Thank you. Okay, John Ellison. Calling Mr. Ellison is Dan Bauzos.
I am John Ellison. I'm a lawyer, former president of the ECOS board, and currently the co-chair of the ECOS Land Use Committee. You're going to hear me coming back over and over like a broken record regarding the privilege and responsibility you have to steer Sacramento County toward helping to combat human-caused climate change. If we do not work together toward accomplishing this, like Greta Thunberg, the 16-year-old climate change activist, said, shame on us. Now, this is one of the more environmentally friendly proposed developments, and Mr. Smith pointed out as a recent amendment to the development agreement said there'll be full electrification, which is a good thing. But one of the bullets we saw is that there are voluntary green building standards. Why not mandatory green building standards? Our house is burning, friends. We must act immediately to alleviate the climate change crisis. Enacting a strong climate action plan is part of this, and you have the power to make that happen.
Great, thank you. Dan Bauzos, forgive me if I'm mispronouncing that. Dan? No?
Maybe the street address?
There is none. Okay, Joy Najian? Nahijian.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Supervisor Natoli and Chairman Cerna and all the supervisors. We really appreciate all your work on this particular project. I'm Joy Nahigian from the Mather Alliance, and our group has partnered with our Mather Independence at Mather community to create an alliance to band together. We created this coalition, if you will, to respond to development plans that you had for the Mather field. And we've had the tremendous privilege to work directly on the stakeholders group that you, the supervisors, had recommended during the first phase of the DEIR. So we're really grateful to have some input on that, and we wish to express our thanks for all that everyone's done to provide this excellent final environmental impact study and the results of it. So there are a few little things that still need to get addressed, as specifically the one that Supervisor Natoli brought up about the traffic problem that we have through the Mather Independence at Mather on Excelsior. The thoroughfare traffic is a serious problem for us, but that is not why I came to speak. I actually came just to say thank you, and then also to address a couple of issues that we submitted in our comment letter to the Office of Planning that Todd and his team they actually specifically addressed each one of ours to our satisfaction, each one of our comments. But there were two things that were out of their purview, and that was number one, the Mather Alliance proposes that that someone, I don't know if it's under your purview, but to name a road in the Mather South community after Supervisor Natoli. And I know that's
Nobody
not
bought a house on that street.
I know that's not an EIR issue. However, we want to reflect our esteem and gratitude for all that he's done for the Mather South development, as well as all the outlining communities in his district. And so we're hopefully that would be something that we could address later. I don't know how that works. But also, we've also requested repeatedly that we reinstate the Eagles Nest Road that was renamed Zinfandel Road, which is beyond, it's right at the, we're proposing that right at Douglas intersection, that right when it goes into the community, right at the community, the golf course and beyond to Kiefer Road, that get reinstated as Eagles Nest Road. And I know that there's some public petition that needs to be submitted, and there also is a fee, about $1,600. And so we're requesting somehow that we can bypass that process and just reinstate that name of that road. And so we would be very willing to submit that request in through the public process, but we also just respectfully request that that happen. So thank you very much, and we again appreciate all that you've done.
Great. Thank you. Okay. Sean Worth. Calling Mr. Worth is Martin Strattle.
Good afternoon. I'm the Conservation Chair for the Untitled Chapter of the Sierra Club, which comprises 24 Northern California counties. I represented the Sierra Club in the stakeholder group that was created through the leadership of Supervisor Natoli and run with the organizational expertise of Todd Smith and Leon Moffitt. It was an extraordinary experience for me to be in a room with people who were like-minded and to work with a developer who actually got it. We had very difficult, complex problems to solve, and they were exemplary in their effort and their willingness to help us solve those problems. I think that needs to be acknowledged, appreciated, and thanked for. It was, for me, a sui generis experience, a one of a kind in 20 years of doing this. So I was very privileged to be there. I wanted to make just a general comment on some of the climate change suggestions. And the Sierra Club sees this as a regional problem. We lack regional leadership. We do not see this as a problem inherent to this project. I think there was a missed opportunity here. You had a group of developers who really understood the protection of the environment, and I think would have been more than willing to have gone along with a more aggressive effort to address that issue. So I want to say thank you, Supervisor Natoli, Liam Moffitt, Todd Smith, Phil, and your team.
Thanks, Sean. Thank you, Sean.
Thank you. Martin Strattle. And following Mr. Strattle is Roxanne Fuentes.
Good afternoon, members of the board. My name is Martin Stratt. I'm with Jeffrey Mangels, Butler & Mitchell in San Francisco. I'm here this afternoon speaking on behalf of Mr. Angelo Sikopoulos, the applicant for the Jackson Township Specific Plan. As you may know, we've previously submitted several letters over the past couple of weeks and over the past year, including including letters during the designated comment period that have addressed the secret review for this project. We have identified a number of issues. I'm not going to recap them all today, but I am going to touch on a few issues related to air quality and climate change. First, we reviewed the new discussion of ozone precursor impacts in the final EIR that is revised. The EIR now acknowledges the 2018 decision of the California Supreme Court in Friant Ranch, which requires agencies to provide an analysis of ozone precursors on human health. What that means is agencies have to now disclose how ozone precursors will affect conditions such as asthma. In the final EIR, the county said that it couldn't provide an analysis because it does not yet know the demographics of who's going to live in the project. Of course they do not, but they still have to provide that analysis. The project at issue in the Supreme Court case was also a large residential project, and the California Supreme Court said you still have to provide that analysis, and the matter was remanded. What the county should have done here and should do here is use the demographics for the rest of the county to provide a good faith analysis. What's in the record right now does not comply with that decision and the Supreme Court's directive in that case. Second, with respect to air quality, again, following up on a point raised by Supervisor Frost about the rendering plant, in our February 2019 comment letter, we discussed the 6th significance threshold in the EIR, which relates to whether or not there'll be a significant odor on residents in the project and within the vicinity. The county concluded that it was a significant impact, and then they said that it'll be mitigated to a level below significance because the deeds will require a disclosure of the rendering plant. A disclosure in the deed will notify future residents of the significant impact. It will not reduce that significant impact. Therefore, that portion of the county's analysis is flawed and is not supported by substantial evidence. Third, with regard to the climate change analysis, we've identified multiple problems as we've set forth in our letters. First, the county now asserts in the revised FEIR for the first time that it is doing what it calls a, quote, project-specific GHG reduction plan, end quote. It provides citations to the CEQA guidelines, but if you read those cited CEQA guidelines, there is no reference to a project-specific GHG plan. Nor is there one attached to the FEIR. So that new discussion about a proposed project-specific plan is a mystery, and it's not consistent with the CEQA guidelines. Second, the county tries to rely on the 2011 Climate Action Plan to do its climate change analysis.
I'm going to ask you to conclude your past your 3 minutes, please.
Yes, sir. That document is a policy document. It has no thresholds or methodology, so it cannot be used to complete a meaningful analysis. Third, the county has decided not to include an analysis of construction impacts as it pertains to greenhouse gas. That is completely unprecedented. Typically, what agencies do is they analyze the construction impacts and they amortize them over the course of the project. For the reasons I've discussed here today and as set forth in our letter, we urge you to recirculate the EIR. Thank you for your time.
Roxanne Fuentes.
Hi, Roxanne Fuentes, Sacramento. Excuse me. I'm opposed to the proposed project. This project would destroy 850 acres of vernal pool grassland. Well over 90% of vernal pools in the Sacramento Valley have been wiped out. The plan area contains grasslands, wetlands, vernal pool areas, intermittent drainages, and swales, endangered vernal pool, fairy shrimp, vernal pool, tadpole shrimp, and Rick Secker's scavenger beetles would all be lost if this project is approved. The proposed project would cause the loss of habitat for the rare western spade-foot toad, whose numbers have decreased drastically, mostly due to habitat loss. Toads in the proposed project area will be killed by bulldozers, run over by cars, chopped up by mowers and weed whackers, and poisoned by herbicides, pesticides, and other toxins. Noise and vibrations would break their dormancy. All elderberry shrubs would be destroyed, causing the loss of the endangered elderberry longhorn beetle. 5 special status plants occur in the area: slender orchid grass, Sacramento orchid grass, Ahart's dwarf, rush, Boggs Lake hedge, hyssop, and legionnaire. These would all be destroyed by the project. There are 455 native trees and 22 non-native trees in the area. These would be destroyed. Off-site infrastructure would damage and destroy riparian habitat, marsh habitat, and native oak trees. The project would create more light pollution, further disrupting the natural habitat and ruin the night sky. Hazardous materials used at the airbase may be released during construction. 18% of Mather South Plan is in the overflight zone. This is of a concern and may interfere with airport operations. Tricolored blackbirds forage in the area. Construction would contribute to their decline. Western burrowing owls would be destroyed. Adult owls, juvenile owls, and eggs would be killed by construction. Northern harriers, white-tailed kites, loggerhead shrikes, short-eared owls, and grasshopper sparrows occur in the area and would be just pushed nearer to extinction by the project. Annual grasslands, scrub, open portions of cottonwood, woodland in the area are habitat for the American badgers. Adult badgers and young badgers would be killed by this construction. Western pond turtle adults, eggs, hatchlings would be killed by the project. Trees in the area provide nest sites for Swainson's hawks. The project would destroy these trees and remove 592 acres of annual grassland foraging habitat, which would result in the death of individual hawks and eggs. Swainson's hawks foraging habitat is greater in large expanses of open space and agricultural areas than in fragmented areas. The Swainson's hawk has had a 90% decline, and any loss of nesting and foraging habitat will push this hawk closer to extinction.
Ms. Fuentes, we're in possession of your verbatim statement. So your 3 months.
I'm coming close to the end.
Okay, well, not according to this, you're not. So
Okay.
you're past your 3 minutes already.
Yeah, you got 4 more paragraphs.
There's the third page, Dawn.
Yeah. It's just
Okay, this contains habitat under the California Fish and Game Code, Section 3503, and the Migratory Bird Treaty Act. If this project and other projects are approved, 17,688 acres of grassland habitat will be lost. There are no more large expanses of interconnected wetland complexes surrounded by open space, and no feasible mitigation available to reduce impacts to a less than significant level. It's not necessary to approve every development that comes along. And during the general plan, the Board of Supervisors and the Planning Commission all expressed their desire to retain large areas of open space. This open space is an asset to Sacramento County. We have a responsibility to our fellow species on this earth to ensure they have a place to live just as we do. This land should not be rezoned and the project should not be approved.
Thank you.
Thanks, Roxanne.
Okay. George Phillips.
Chairman Cerna, members of the board, George Phillips here on behalf of Sacramento Ranches, East Sacramento Ranches and the Sacramento Rendering Plan. First off, obviously the issue of the rendering plan has been raised this afternoon, and we typically are concerned about residential uses proximate to the plant. That said, though, as the board knows, we have a specific plan application pending before the board, the New Bridge specific plan that we hope to be in front of you on in the near future. And obviously that, as we've also indicated to the board, is really the rendering plant's exit strategy from this area. So we hope that those issues that you've discussed today will all be taken care of in due time. That said, we are here today to commend Lewis Communities and their representative, Phil Rodriguez, for the plan that they've put together. The collaborative atmosphere that we have enjoyed with them over the last several years of working together through these planning issues as a neighboring project, and wish that you would support this project today and whenever you take action on it. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, one last call for, I believe it's Mr. Dan Bouzos. That's what I can glean from the handwriting of the last name. Is there anyone named Dan that wishes to address the board on this item? All right, seeing none. That is the conclusion of our public speakers. I neglected to ask our planning staff whether the applicant even had a presentation. They did not complete a speaker slip, and they are subject to the same speaker slip requirement, as far as I'm concerned, as the rest of the public. So I see Mr. Rodriguez getting up, so why don't you come on down, Phil?
Thank you, Chair Cerna and your fellow supervisors, and I will fill out that speaker slip as required. Phil Rodriguez, the Lewis Group of Companies representing Mather South LLC. We are very excited still about this project. As Leanne explained, it's been not what she called a 7-year journey. It's been an 8-year journey, because before our application was finalized, we spent probably a year working with county staff on developing the original plan for the project. So it's been 8 years. It's been a long journey. I want to compliment your staff. They're all here tonight, not all of them, but on a thorough review and analysis of this project. At times it was, as you might expect from the development community, a developer, frustrating, but I can assure you that they have looked at this backwards and forwards and inside and out, making sure that they've thought of everything they could with respect to how this development will be built out in the future. I heard a couple of questions from you all with respect to certain items. I think Bob Davidson addressed the park ranger costs. In our mind, that would be a service cost associated with the management and maintenance of the preserve in perpetuity. So I think that's been addressed. As far as the further extension of Zinfandel, or Eagle's Nest, as it might be named, we're looking at that through guidance through the dynamic modeling tool, which will tell us when specific offsite improvements will need to be built as we bring forward all of the small lot tentative subdivision maps for the project. Those neighborhoods will be designing and developing, and that starts in phase 1. It finishes in phase 2, 3, and 4. So there will be a point in time where the county will give guidance to explain when we need to construct certain offsite improvements, which includes that particular roadway. There is 1,600 units approximately in phase 1 and 2, but we expect that there will be some further need for other transportation improvements proximate to the project or just adjacent to the project. With that, I can say that the analysis that's in our financing plan really shows that we've got about $30+ million worth of fair share offsite roadway improvements in that phase 1 and phase 2 development plan area requirement. In addition to that, $7 million worth of Sacramento County Transportation Development Impact fees that will put money into the pot to go take care of transportation improvements. In total, really, with that particular phase 1 and phase 2, we'll have about $95 million of development impact fees, and that's not including school fees. So we are looking forward to this development. It as a lot of you heard from most of the folks in the audience, it has been a really collaborative process. 2015, 2016, when our project was brought forward to you, it wasn't our project; it was the Mather Field EIR, but the concern was with our plan that was associated with that. We sat in the audience watching the concern raised by the community and thought, well, no, hope is not lost. We can redesign this. We just need to meet with those folks and figure out what it is that they'd like to see. And that 18, 19, 20 meetings that we had, stakeholder meetings, was rewarding, as Sean Worth explained. It was an easy collaborative process, I think, because we were all of right mind thinking of trying to find a solution to the issues in hand. So again, nothing's perfect. We do know that there are concerns in the other parts of the communities, as in California and everywhere else, with NIMBYs and other property owners and developers concerned with any particular development plan. But we feel we've all done a really valiant effort in designing and developing and charting the course of this plan for the future. So I'm happy to answer any questions with me.
Don't go far.
I'm sure. So I've got my engineering team, I've got my environmental counsel, I've my land use counsel here, my finance plan consultant. So happy to answer questions.
Thank you, Phil. Appreciate it. I have a question for our county council. We're being asked to essentially approve conditions, correct me if I'm wrong, conditions in the DA and also mitigation measures per the CEQA document today, correct?
That's correct.
Is there anything that legally binds us to only considering those conditions in those two parts of the entitlement cluster that we're being asked to consider today? Are those the only conditions that we can consider a thumbs up or thumbs down on, or can we actually suggest any additions from the dais?
So you can suggest additions, but if they are substantive changes, you may not be able to move forward on those today. It would have to go back to the Planning Commission and things of that nature.
And substantive, basically that's your interpretation in terms of how you would advise us, in terms of what we would say?
Yes.
Okay, that's fair. So I'll start off, and I suspect other of my colleagues have comments they would like to issue. But I have to say that, first of all, I really do commend the development team for their patience. First of all, it's been a haul, as has been made mention of by various speakers today. I think they've done a good job to balance the concerns expressed by stakeholders, especially when it comes to the uniqueness of the site relative to vernal pools and the preservation of those vernal pools and other environmental considerations. I think they've been good to work with in terms of hearing concerns on circulation and how to make adjustments in the plan area on circulation. I'm glad to see that there has been an evolution in thinking in terms of the use of a university site, quite frankly, to kind of tease out support for the project. However, with all of that said, I do tend to agree with the concerns that have been expressed by a few speakers today, that we do not have a climate action plan against which to gauge this development. And this is one of 4 that we're going to be at. These are big master plans that are going to result in tens of thousands of units eventually, with all the benefit, all the shelter, new neighborhoods, population growth in Sacramento County, but also the impacts that come with that growth. And I've been asking for a climate action plan. I know others have been asking for it for years now. And I know that we have an operational climate action plan that's in place for the county itself. But last time we had an open discussion about it in these chambers, my recollection is that kind of the general comment was, well, we just don't have the resources, staff or otherwise, to complete it right now. Well, I got to tell you, as someone that not only sits on this board, but also sits on the local Air Quality Management District Board of Directors and the California Air Resources Board, someone that is pretty intimately involved with addressing greenhouse gas emissions through state policy and resource allocation at the state level as well as the local level. I have a need to be very consistent in who I am as a public representative and what positions I hold. In other words, I don't want to necessarily be forced to approve projects with no climate action plan locally, and then the next day, literally in some cases, go have rich discussions 2 blocks away at the California Air Resources Board about it. So I do have grave concerns about the lack of a climate action plan as part of what we're being asked to consider when it comes not to just this project, but to all our master plans in Sacramento County. And so that's why I teased out of our county council to begin my commentary here this afternoon whether or not it's possible at this late moment, could we add a condition, and I'd like to hear from the applicant about their disposition relative to my suggestion. Could we require that once we do have a climate action plan, and hopefully this lights a fire under all of us to get it done sooner rather than later, that once we have it, that the project shall comport with what the intent is of that climate action plan. That's my general suggestion in terms of an amendment. And I'm looking at county council to see how you respond to that.
Wow.
There you go. Wow.
And it would not be a lot of verbiage, I don't think, that would be added to the DA or perhaps even the CEQA document at this point. It would simply be a statement about being consistent with the Sacramento County's climate action plan.
Well, I think if...
And I'm wondering, do you want Todd and I to speak a little bit more about the measures that are in this plan and how they might relate to a future climate action plan?
But I kind of don't want to hear that,
Okay.
with all due respect, Leanne, because that's totally cart before the horse, right?
You want to
I
pause
think
and
it's
about it?
somewhat problematic, honestly, to impose a condition that is speculative on a project. And what I mean by that is we don't know at this point the nature, the contents of our climate action plan, and to request that a developer agree to something that has not yet been developed with conditions that we do not know, I think is unfair and may not be legally defensible. So I would not recommend that you proceed in that manner.
Okay, fair enough. I'd like to hear from Phil to see what you think about that.
Thank you, Chair Cerna, for the opportunity. We are, as you, I think, have gauged over the course of the last 8 years, very cooperative, right? The concern we have is a delay which inhibits our ability to move forward with the development of the project. And, in a lot of environmental issues, whether it's climate change, transportation fees, anything, we typically can agree that if a jurisdiction would like to implement a program in the future, we're happy to comply with that program. We'll be a part of that process, but it shouldn't slow us down. So if the county would like to move forward with developing a climate action plan, and it takes too long, or it takes 3 years and we're ready to go in year 1, we just continue moving forward, and we will adapt accordingly whenever.
And I appreciate that. But that's why I'm not saying necessarily if you don't do it, I can't support it necessarily right now. But that's why I'm trying to find out a middle ground. And if you're telling me from the podium that would be your intent, I got to believe there's a way to memorialize it in the actions that are before us today, so that you don't have to wait, we don't have to wait. And that there's significant recognition that is a very real intent moving forward.
Yeah, again, we will be a participant in that process if the county's developing a climate action plan. So we can assist in providing our comments if there's something that's infeasible or that is a problem for our project to move forward. Our concern again is if we get stuck with waiting on a process to be completed and can't move forward because there's just so much going on, and the county just can't get to finality on a particular plan.
Okay,
Does that help?
It makes it clear what your position is. Thank you. Mr. Tully?
Yeah. Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. I wanted to circle back on one item that I'm prepared to make some comments and certainly issue some thank yous as well in advance, obviously, of any action we might take here this afternoon. But I just wanted maybe if Ron could come back up then, and I appreciated that Phil addressed it in his comments, but again, there's a lot of moving parts in the transportation network, and I appreciate the work that Department of Transportation working with this project, but certainly with other ones that we'll see down the road here, probably not in the too distant future. Again, knowing the issue that exists, in fact, you can go out there this afternoon about this time and see, the amount of traffic that goes through the Independence and Mather neighborhood. And we heard from people speak here today. And then I think the work that obviously you've advanced, and I thank you, Ron, I thank Dan Schuman and others who've been working on, advancing the long delayed discussion about the Douglas Road extension, which would help alleviate that, but that's still many years off. And we have a development before us today that is for our consideration. So is there anything else you can add to what maybe Phil did, maybe your thoughts about this? Because I think timing of that road, and I want to talk about the name in just a moment, but also just existing Eagle's Nest and Kiefer and those areas. So where are we, at least in your view, on future, but bringing that back to the almost this very moment about making sure that we stay on time, on task, and also with some of the things that we can probably do in an intervening period of time. So.
Yeah, I appreciate the time to kind of think this through. I wish I probably had a better answer. I will say that there's a couple efforts going on. One, our department is looking at the solutions to this as things occur. So I don't know if it came across as, well, when it occurs, we're going to run the dynamic tool. we're already looking at possible phasing, although, as I mentioned before, it's extremely hard to predict, but we're engaging in that effort. In addition to that, I didn't want to give the illusion that the roadway that would just be abandoned and left to dirt, people could use it. With the Parks Department, they started about last year sometime, the public access plan. It is possible that the public access plan will utilize the portion of the roadway that is left behind to provide access and accessibility, for instance, but also access to students to be able to get them out into the preserve. And so there may be a better and greater use for that. I don't have an answer, again, not being able to predict how development will occur, certainly not being far enough in that plan, but I will say that there's a lot of efforts going on to try to look into that and to look at possible outcomes as things move forward. And so I don't know if that's a better answer, but.
So let me offer a suggestion. Again, I don't think it holds up anything today, and it doesn't, give any specific direction. But I guess it sounds to me like at least for a period of time, probably for several years, we're going to, and if maybe well into the future, it will provide public access to the preserve. But and if that's through access, then that maybe that's the plan that people anticipate. But it is it's a publicly used road now in its current condition. And I know, again, I thank you for some loads of gravel and working with Parks Department to at least, address some of the most, serious deficiencies in that road. And you can travel all weather. I mean, it's, again, kind of at your own risk. But I guess what I would ask then, if in fact we're going to use that for a period of time until either development triggers and or other plans for parks materialize in concert with a realigned roadway that bumps to the east, then we ought to look at some modest level of improvement and maybe maintaining it as a gravel road, but at least getting it squared away so that people do use it there, with due caution and so forth, that it'll facilitate some of that north-south movement for a period of time. Because with construction that will occur, with people coming to the park and obviously looking for other ways around, I think we ought to at least promote some safe use of that roadway. So I guess I would just maybe suggest that at a minimum, Ron, that DOT working with parks, and I know economic development, because economic development's been drawn into this conversation over time as well. So I think we ought to figure something out that addresses the kind of the intermittent or I guess the intervening uses before interim uses, let's say that, of that road until other plans are fully developed and built out.
Absolutely. We'll look into it and I'll report back.
Okay, I appreciate that. That's all I need on that point. So, Mr. Chair, I guess I would just like to, maybe unless there are other questions on the specifics, but, I think that I know there's been a whole lot of work done on this by a whole lot of people, and there are a lot of thank yous, and some have been issued already, and I would echo those thank yous. And I'm just going to take a moment before I go into some more specific comments. But to, again, thank Todd Smith and Leanne, certainly our folks who, on the planning end have carried, the ball since the 2015 board discussion. These chambers were full of folks, as several of us recall. And I think the board, took it seriously. Our county staff took it seriously. I appreciate the leadership of the county executive's office. Appreciate the work the contributions of economic development, who have continued to work side by side, the work of county parks, and again, a whole team of county folks. But it's been complemented by folks in the community. And again, I thank the Mather Alliance, which again, some of that got sparked early on by a visit that Joy and David Nahijian had with me when we were looking at some of the information in early 2015. We had some, work groups in advance of that board session. Again, that was a bit stormy. Nonetheless, I think there was a lot of good that came out of that. But certainly, they, along with, Vanessa Mergian, Nate Manley, Elisa Fugino, Ken Pawlowski, all, again, on behalf of a much bigger neighborhood, a much bigger group of folks, of residents and other concerned parties, really stepped up from a community and neighborhood standpoint, independents of Mather, and people that were concerned about what was being proposed. And, along with that, then we put the stakeholders group together. And again, I thank my colleagues in this board, because this board basically redirected that effort. And with certainly the willing work of, Lewis Holmes sat down with folks from Splash, even Emily Butler, with Sean Worth from ECOS, and some of the other representatives who participated in that work group. And I think, again, not only rolled up their sleeves, but then worked on a plan that hopefully could find, considerations by the various review agencies, but also that would ultimately come to this board, as it is today, for consideration for our approval, if that's what we choose to do. But again, many, many hours were logged and a lot of work, and I appreciate the willingness of folks that I've mentioned and others maybe that I've missed to work cooperatively and coming out of a very stormy hearing. But with this board, I think, was clear in its direction, and I thank my colleagues for the guidance that they offered in support of that. So with that being said, I want to just maybe speak just briefly to what's before us here today. Maybe I'll start off with the easiest part of that. And yes, we did rename Eagles Nest Road, Zinfandel, south of Douglas. I am very open to the idea of restoring the original name, and I would suggest that the county initiate that process, and we'll have a public hearing. And again, I didn't hear objections from obviously the developer group, but there's a golf course and a park that's there. But I trust that we can bring that back forward, and there's I don't think any magic to whatever name it is, but I do think that it may be more reflective of some of the work that this board has done and that we're being asked to consider here today. And obviously it's retained south of Kiefer currently. And again, unless there's some reason why. Nav, you're looking at me?
No, I was trying to figure out which section that's.
Oh, the section south of Douglas.
South of Douglas.
South of Douglas, yeah. That was the section we renamed, and north of that would still be Zinfandel Drive. So, and again, I mean, we initiate that. If there's a public process, then I would respect that. I don't think the neighbors or the alliance ought to bear that. We renamed it under our authorities, and we still, have the authority to consider that. So back to the project, and I want to thank again those who've weighed in from the environmental community on the climate action plan. I would concur that it's probably past time when this board, again, that's not going to necessarily be an easy discussion, but nonetheless, with the backdrop, I think, of development in the county and community, it's probably important that we have that before us. And again, it hasn't been for lack of effort on planning department, but there are some items that will be contentious and I'm sure a bit controversial, but that's the nature of the work that we do. So I would suggest that we try to get that to us as quickly as possible. Then with the project itself, though, this has been a long time getting to us, and there are other projects that will follow behind that have been in the planning process for many years. But this has its roots, obviously, in the closure of Mather in 1993, and the subsequent work by a whole lot of folks, some who've left county service, others who continue to work on various facets of it. But in 1997, we had a specific plan that came before us, and we were still looking at base conversion. A lot of things have happened at Mather, a lot of good things, a lot of job creation, and public assets that have been improved, and certainly with a lot of, I think, work ahead. But this project is before us today is a key component of that. It's seen different iterations over time, as Todd pointed out in his presentation. It once included a university, and even before that, there were proposals for racetracks and federal prisons, and 50-story hotels, and the list went on and on and on. But what we see before us today, I think, is a practical plan, one that has, involved the community immediately adjacent, but the broader community, and one that I think reflects a whole lot of work, and that will bring housing, but also, I think, additional protections to portions of the preserve that weren't initially contemplated in the proposal. It also will have the Environmental Science Center, which I think will be a real key point of investment, and I appreciate certainly the willingness of the developers, but also, again, our planning and economic development department to work with the constraints that are presented on any piece of property. But that, along with some of the green areas that will be a part of the circulation in the plan, I think are important components. I certainly compliment all the folks that have worked on that, including Lewis Holmes, on that. there's no doubt about it. And I think, again, I would just acknowledge certainly Roxanne Fuentes has been very consistent. She was here for all of our general plan discussions, along with others from the organizations that have spoken here today. And I think has been very consistent in comments about loss of lands that may be in a more natural state, and what that does to the critters and the species. And I think part of the consideration here is the preserve, which will be enhanced over time, its preservation and restoration, but that doesn't fully compensate obviously for some of the other open space areas that will be built spaces once plans are completed and built out. And so I appreciate the consistency she and others have offered to this board, and I certainly take those into account, because I know as we've talked about habitat conservation plans and our ag policies and so forth, some of the same voices have been here relative to the importance of those as it relates to the natural environment, but also obviously the interface with suburban, urban, and farmed or certainly developed areas or proposed development areas in the county. So all being said, I would just lastly note that I think the work on the transportation network, and certainly to address other initiatives in the county, including providing housing variations and types for folks and employment centers, and how that all comes together, are very, very important. And I think this plan reflects a well thought out approach, one that obviously people can take exception to for whatever reason. But it's been a long time coming, and again, I think it certainly has evolved out of the 2015 work that got us to the hearing in September of that year, and now here we are 4 years plus later, and actually considering a more final plan. Of note, then, two things that I'll close with is that I do believe this discussion about the endowment for Mather, since it's embedded in the development agreement, maybe for today's purposes, there's a consideration that is a cap, but I still think, in fairness to the lands at Mather, not just these, but the rest of it, that we at least have a discussion regarding the assignment of costs associated with the long-term preservation and restoration of the Mather Preserve. And that's going to be a key point, because I know at some point in time that that's going to be ponied up, and the federal regulators are going to want to, if I'm not mistaken, are going to want to know that money is basically assured or guaranteed. And then lastly, just on the infill fee, to have some additional policy discussion before this board at a time in the not too distant future about that, because I think, again, those dollars won't flow for a while, but it's going to be important for this board and future boards to know that as development occurs in this area of the county, that there is a reinvestment and investment in other areas in our community that hopefully promote additional housing and vitality for job creation and economic development elsewhere. And so all in all, I think, again, people, I've seen the flood of paperwork. It's been a good deal of time reading, as I'm sure my colleagues have, the back and forth and challenges to certain aspects of what's before us today. But I will just say that I think that people work very hard, have really given an effort to match up, what the requirements are through, legal and other statutes that require us to do certain things, but also to have a plan that's thoughtful, one that reflects the, certainly the environmental impacts and ways to best mitigate or address those if they're not fully mitigated. And I think have done it in a fashion that's been very quick turnaround. So compliments to all the folks, including those who may have raised issues that, again, have reflected changes, obviously, in what's before us this very moment. So with that, at some juncture today, I'm prepared to make a motion appropriate to the items that are before us. And with a great deal of thanks to all the folks that have been involved up to this very moment. Thanks.
Okay, it's been moved. Is there a second? Moved and second. Other comments, statements by members of the board? Member Peters.
Thank you. I just wanted to say, well, I haven't been to many of these meetings. I have watched the process as it unfolds and spent quite a few hours this weekend going through all the materials. And I was very impressed with the thoroughness of the staff investigation of the project, and impressed by the residents that live at Mather and some other interest groups at Mather. The Splash came in favor of it, and so I was just very impressed with all the work that was done and the willingness of the developer to bend to the desires of the neighbors and suggestions from the staff. It's been a long project. You don't always get everything you want on a project like this. The good news and the bad news of it taking so long is you're able to get all the requests in and review them and be able to take care of most of them. So I plan to support the project.
Okay. Supervisor Kennedy?
Yeah, just a couple of comments. One is, in addition to all of the people that Supervisor Natoli thanked, I want to thank Supervisor Natoli for all of his work on this, because
sounds like the Grammys.
It's a better, yeah. It's a better project than it was before, and so I commend you for the work that you did on that. To the chair and to staff, I will say I completely agree with the chair on the urgency. We have to step up our level of urgency for a climate plan. I completely agree. I don't want to hold up this process. I don't think it's fair to the applicant or to the process. I want to respect the process itself. But that's not to say that I don't completely agree with the chair that we're behind the 8 ball on this thing, and we got to get moving on it. So.
Supervisor Frost.
I just want to say I really appreciate Leanne and all of the staff who have helped me come up to speed with this. I know this has been going on for a long time, and I appreciate that you've worked so hard to create some equitable dialogue with all the other projects. I know there's a lot of concern. My big concern today was in hopes that, some of these issues that are still out there nagging at people, that everyone will be involved in those solutions, and it sounds like you're putting those processes in place that make sure that happens. I reiterate all the thanks that everyone else had expressed, and I'm prepared to support the project. Thank you.
Supervisor Natoli.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I guess I know that the vote board's punched up here, but I think there's probably a series of motions and maybe embodied, and again, to capture any of the direction I don't have, you were writing, so if we could kind of have that. So if we're going to vote all on one fell swoop, then I think people need to know, because for the record, you've got, I don't know, there's 13 different outlined in the staff report. I don't know if we do all those in one. Certainly if we can do that, but there ought to be some clarification so people that either watching and or that, the audio tape is obviously official, know exactly what it is we're doing. I can move the staff recommendation, but there was a couple of additions that came out of that, and so maybe Leanne, Nav, or Todd, you can get us, or June, get us to a point so we know we take this in appropriate order, because I think we have to act on the environmental document, and then there's other motions that follow, and there's subsequent ones that would come, so.
So I want to refer you to the first and second page of the staff report, the 13 recommended actions, and I want to acknowledge the revisions that came in that memo that was distributed earlier today, which reflect on attachments 2, 22, and 32, which is where those changes to those mitigation measures lived in your package. So it is essentially in the order as identified in the staff report. So starting with certification of the final EIR.
Okay, that's a separate motion, is it not? Don't we have to do that before you take any other actions?
You can do them all at once.
Okay.
As long as you do them in the order.
Yeah, procedurally, I like to do it all at once.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
And then you would just go in this order: certification of the environmental document, the approval of the general plan amendments, then the specific plan amendment, then the adoption of the community master plan, zoning ordinance amendment, affordable housing strategy, amendment to the financing plan, urban services plan, adoption of the DA, adoption of the CEQA findings of fact and statement of overriding considerations, and finally adoption of the mitigation monitoring reporting program with those modifications clarified in the memo this morning.
Okay, so Mr. Chair, just as a maker of the motion, then also would be a part of that to you took some notes on some other items that were mentioned.
A couple items that I have. One is look at renaming the road south of Douglas.
Initiate the
process.
Initiate the process for renaming.
Two, I use the word workshop, but 2 discussions with the board about the preserve and the funding that goes with it. And the second one is the infill discussion. Global comment that I took from the board is the urgency behind getting a climate change plan in front of the board.
On that last one, that seems a separate policy subject matter that doesn't seem to be germane to the list of entitlements that we're being asked to take action on.
No, it's not. Those are just to do. I'm not asking to vote for it.
Okay, so they're not part of the motion, but those directions clear, then?
Yeah, I just want to make sure the board knew what direction I have on that. Those are the things I have, not a motion, but additional items that you want to see come back.
Good.
Okay. All right, then that is my motion in the sequence as outlined with the additions as Mr. Smith noted on the conditions for the attachments as outlined.
Okay, and that's clear to the maker of the second. Okay. If there's no more comment, please vote.
And the motion carries with Supervisor Cerna voting no.
Great. All right. Thank you. I have a number of off-agenda speaker slips, but I know that Mr. Gale is not here. He was the first to submit an agenda speaker slip, so we'll move on. If you could please leave the chambers quietly. We do have the remainder of business to take care of this afternoon. Thank you. First up is Erica Costa with the American Lung Association. And just a reminder for those that are speaking on off agenda, we are forbade by law to take action on whatever subject matter you might wish to address us about. And we have to limit our discussion even to only general subject matter. Go ahead.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Erica Costa. I'm with the American Lung Association. I'm the advocacy director for the state of California as it relates to tobacco policy. We're here today to urge your consideration to pass a county ordinance to restrict the sale of flavored tobacco products, including menthol. We understand that there was an item that was pulled today because of various policy issues, and we appreciate you pulling that item. I wanted to bring to your attention, tomorrow we are coming out with our annual State of Tobacco Control report. This report gives a grade to local jurisdictions in California based on various criteria, multi-unit housing, making various areas smoke-free, and there's also an area that deals with what we call bonus areas, such as pack size and tobacco-free pharmacies, but there's also a piece for flavored tobacco, and we just wanted to bring it to your attention. It would be really great to have Sacramento County on the board next year as having prohibited the sale of flavored tobacco within the county. So just wanted to bring that to your attention and urge your consideration moving forward. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Lindsay Freitas.
Good afternoon, Lindsay Freitas with the Campaign for Tobacco-Free Kids. Echoing the sentiment of my colleague from the Lung Association, thanking you for pulling the ordinance and looking forward to having a more broad discussion about the importance of including all flavored tobacco. In addition to the 135% increase in youth use of electronic cigarettes since 2017, excuse me, we also know that mint and menthol products are a driving factor in youth use of tobacco, and we really want to stress the importance of including not just e-cigarettes, but menthol cigarettes, cigarillos, and flavored chew. The top 5 most popular brands of cigarillos come in a multitude of flavors and cheap prices for youth to purchase, so that's a really big problem. And I've also been asked to mention that there were a group of students that wanted to come and present to you tonight on how flavored tobacco impacts them within their community and impacts their friends. And they really thank you as well for pulling it and looking at the broader issue. Thank you.
Great, thank you.
Thanks.
All right, Tim Gibbs.
Tim Gibbs with the American Cancer Society Cancer Action Network. We'd been working on this policy for some time. It looked like it was coming before the board in November. Had seen a draft ordinance. It looked good. It looked similar to the other policies in the region. Our neighbors, including Sacramento City, Yolo County, West Sacramento, Woodland, have all passed comprehensive flavors ordinances. In fact, there's been more than 60 jurisdictions in the state that have passed them. So we were definitely disappointed when we saw the draft recently circulated that had exempted all menthol cigarettes and cigarillos and other flavored combustible tobacco products. We're appreciative that the board pulled that agenda item so we can continue our work on it. And, it's really flavors that are the issue here. It's flavors that started this youth e-cigarette epidemic, and it's also sustained this epidemic, But it's important that we include all flavored tobacco products in this ordinance, because when we start saying that, one flavored tobacco product is okay to sell and another isn't, the danger is that the young people who got addicted through these flavors will chase those flavors from one tobacco product like e-cigarettes to another like combustible cigarettes. And so we know that youth who use e-cigarettes are also more likely to use combustible cigarettes. So like I said, we're glad the agenda item got pulled, and we look forward to coming back to support a comprehensive ordinance in the future. Thank you.
Great, thank you. And then our final speaker for off agenda is Kimberly Bankston Lee.
I don't know if you have a way to display this, or should I just put it in front?
You could display part of it right there. The white area is an overhead.
Is the area that you'll see?
Yes.
All right, well, that's pretty good. Okay. Good afternoon, Chair Cerna and Board of Supervisors. My name is Kimberly Bankston Lee, and I'm with the SOUL Project, Saving Our Legacy African Americans for Smoke-Free Safe Places. Thank you, as others had said, for pulling the ordinance off of the agenda to learn more about why restricting flavored vaping products is not enough. A comprehensive policy that includes all flavors is needed to protect all county residents. Exempting menthol cigarettes and other flavored tobacco products like candy and fruit-flavored little cigars, like I have displayed here, blunt wrappers, and smokeless tobacco is a social and racial injustice to African Americans and the poor. Why? 1 in 4 African Americans, as well as people living at or below the poverty level in our county, smoke, and most started before the age of 18. 7 out of 10 African American smokers smoke mentholated cigarettes. This is true for both adult and youth smokers. Flavored tobacco, including menthol, is appealing to youth because it numbs the throat, which disguises the harmful effects of smoking. And over half of youth smokers use menthol cigarettes compared to less than 1/3 of older adult smokers. I participated in the county's Healthy Store for a healthy community survey in 2016, and Newport's, a mentholated cigarette brand, and Swisher Sweets, a flavored little cigar brand, are cheaper in neighborhoods with higher percentages of African American residents than in neighborhoods with fewer African Americans in the county. For example, we found Newport's in District 4 at the highest cost of $8.49 compared to $5.07, which is the lowest in District 5. In District 1, those are $5.99. In District 2, $5.49. In District 3, $6.89. We also found this true for flavored little cigars, where you could purchase them for 69 cents compared to 99 cents, or not sold at all in some of our higher income communities. These products are also advertised more. This is an injustice because these products are sold more often and for less, making them easier to get. When the ordinance comes back, including menthol as a flavor and including all other types of tobacco products, including the ones you see here, you'll be protecting African Americans, youth, and the poor. Thank you.
Great. Thank you all for your patience this afternoon. Again, we're not permitted to certainly make any decisions today about the subject matter, nor are we going to have a discussion about it, but I do appreciate the fact that you've been patient, and waited this long to say your piece before us. And as you made, I think each of you made mention, there is an intent by staff to continue to look at the issue. So thank you. All right. Next item.
Item 55 is the appointments from your own ranks to the Sacramento Homeless Policy Council.
Okay.
Say 54 or 55?
55.
It's 54 in my book. I
54
don't
in
know
my
if that
book.
makes any
Oh,
difference.
I'm sorry, it must be numbered wrong. 54.
Okay. Is anyone presenting?
No, just as way of background, when this item came up in the fall, there's this council that's been created, Homeless Policy Council, and in there, the county has 2 seats. So we presented to the board at that point. We did not ask you to make any appointments. As the memo that Flo has provided, there was conversation that the board had very preliminary. Should it be more unincorporated, more incorporated? And we decided to bring the item back in January for you to have the conversation on who you wanted to appoint.
All right, so two positions.
2 positions.
Gotcha. All right, Supervisor Tully.
Yeah, and just a question. So as part of the Homeless Policy Council, I certainly thank Supervisor Kennedy for his work and others on this. Are the other suburban cities invited to be a part of this? And so will they have representation? Is that, again, as I'm thinking about representation by this board, so the other suburban cities?
We have invited them.
Yeah.
I believe, and Bruce, correct me wrong, I think Galt and Folsom were waiting to hear.
Yeah, I can give a brief update on that.
If you could, that'd be
Supervisor.
helpful. No, it might help
So,
drive some of
yes, all the various cities within the county were going to be on the Homeless Policy Council. And to date, I can tell you that cities of Elk Grove, Folsom, Citrus Heights, Rancho Cordova, and the city of Sacramento have all taken action to appoint people to the council and are looking forward to participating on it.
Okay, good. So
We have not heard from Islaton yet or Galt, to my knowledge.
Okay.
And I think with the changeover in Galt manager, we're trying to make another attempt to see who we can reach to for them to put this on their agenda.
Yeah, Tom Hagelin is the city manager.
The city and the county city of Sacramento and the county have 2 each, and all of the other cities have 1.
Okay, so they're represented. Okay, thanks.
Okay. I'd like to throw out a nomination for us to consider. I'd like to nominate Supervisor Peters and Supervisor Kennedy to serve. I think it's important to have our representation reflect the unincorporated area here in Sacramento County, and District 3 has a pretty sizable population living in the unincorporated area. Doesn't mean that there aren't others of this board that have a similar condition, but I think it's important to kind of have a balanced contingent of supervisors representing the largest city, more or less, in the county, and the largest contiguous unincorporated portion of the county as well. So that would be my nomination. Supervisor Frost.
I just want to ask, so our representation is for the unincorporated. So I'm sorry, I don't know what portion of Supervisors Kennedy's district is unincorporated. I think Supervisor Peters has the largest unincorporated, and
97%.
And then
It's about a third.
D4 and D5 are second and third, and
It's about a third.
a third.
Of his district, he has South Sacramento and Vineyard, large areas.
Okay.
So I'm fine with the suggestion. I mean, unless there are others who want to, I'm comfortable.
Is that a second?
I second it.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Please vote.
Unanimous vote.
Great, thank you.
Okay, now we're on item 55, your nominations. You are continuing to February 11th, the Sacramento County Alcohol and Drug Advisory Board, continuing to February 25th, South Sacramento Area Community Planning Advisory Council, continuing to March 10th, Assessment Appeals Board, County Service Area 4B, Slough House, Wilton, Cosumnes, County Service Area 4C, Delta, and the Southeast Area Community Planning Advisory Council. For your items today, Adult and Aging Commission, Mr. Cerna.
Chiefs are recommending continuing this item to March 10th.
Children's Coalition.
Chiefs recommend nominating Heidi Kaiser and Summer Adams.
And the remainder?
I guess until March 10th.
Okay. Developmental Disabilities Planning and Advisory Council.
Chiefs recommend reappointing Maureen Fitzgerald and continue the remainder to March 10th, please.
Equal Employment Opportunity Advisory Committee.
Chiefs are recommending continuing this item to March 10th.
Fair Oak Cemetery District, Supervisor Peters.
Please continue to February 11th.
Galt Arno Cemetery District, Supervisor Natoli.
Continue to February 25th for arranging an interview.
Mission Oaks Recreation and Park District, Supervisor Peters.
Please continue to February 11th.
And Paratransit, Supervisor Cerna, sorry.
Chiefs are recommending nominating Mark Longren.
Okay. Recreation and Park Commission, Supervisor Peters.
Please continue to February 25th.
Sacramento County Mental Health Board, Supervisor Natoli.
Nominate Mark Hoover.
I can't hear, I'm sorry.
Nominate Mark Hoover.
Okay. And then do you want to continue?
So is there another one? There's been some
Yeah.
confusion. I thought we had this.
There's a family member seat, and then Mark Hoover is for your consumer.
Consumer seat, yes, and continue the other seat for 4 weeks, please. Thanks.
Okay. And then we have Sacramento Environmental Commission, Supervisor Cerna.
Chiefs are recommending the nomination of Traylon Bradley.
Okay. And then we have the Sacramento Housing and Redevelopment Commission, Supervisor Kennedy.
Please continue to February 11th.
And Supervisor Natoli.
Give me just a moment if you could. I'm trying to see if we had an interview scheduled, and I don't know that that's occurred yet. Just give me one to the vote sheet here. But continue for 2 weeks, please.
Okay. And that concludes your nominations.
Great, thank you. Okay.
Now you have your county executive comments
No comments this afternoon.
Okay.
and supervisor comments.
Anyone from the board have any comments? Supervisor Peters.
I'd like to ask the county executive to get working an emergency ordinance for regional parks and all lands within regional parks that ban cell phone towers within the parkway.
We all know where that's coming from.
Now, all parks or just the parkway?
Oh, I said parkway at the end, so, yeah, no, it's, it's a source of income, but not for the parkway.
We have a rub with another agency.
You may want to watch the tape from last week's regional sand meeting.
Regional sand? Okay.
Yeah, that'd be helpful, I think, to you and your staff. Just watch the discussion.
Sure. Yeah, we'll find it.
I do want to make sure that there are lands not owned by the county within the parkway. And I'm hoping Liz can come up with the right wording to make sure that they're included in this ordinance.
Lisa can.
There's some private lands, there's some nonprofit-owned lands, there's another county.
Anything within the parkway, that's
Yep.
what you guys.
And it may be as simple as really consulting the Parkway Master Plan that the legislature's approved to see if there's any existing reference to it.
Got it.
Inferred or not. Okay, any other comments by board members? All right, any adjournments this afternoon? Okay, without further ado, if there's no further business, we are adjourned.
Liz never goes home. She just pops in up there.